Ask to start video. I don't. Okay, I'll do that. So maybe it'll prompt it.
Okay, yes.
Oh, there you go.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov. Welcome.
Yes. Good morning.
Oh, good evening.
Yes.
So it is what, 6:30 p.m., 6:40 p.m. there.
Yep.
Where are you now?
An undisclosed location.
But you're in Pacific Standard Time. I was going to say that you're in
I'm
Los
in.
Angeles, but you're not in Los Angeles, are you?
No. I am in Laughlin, Nevada.
Okay. Is that a nice place?
Very nice and quiet, especially during the coronavirus. Only 7,000 residents.
Oh, that's nice. So it's like
It's in the
if,
desert.
well, it's how close are you to Area 51?
I don't know, but what I can tell you is, I'm going to speak American, just to warn you here. I'm about 100 miles from Las Vegas.
100 miles from Las Vegas, so you're about 300 miles from Area 51. Because Area 51 is about a 3 hour, 3.5 hour drive from Las Vegas, roughly.
You visited.
No, but I was planning to 2 years ago, and instead, silly me, I went back to Canada instead and visited family for 3 weeks rather than go take my Los Angeles trip. My United States trip that was going to take me from I was going to go to Los Angeles, Las Vegas. Las Vegas only because I wanted to go up to Area 51, take a picture of the sign, and then leave, basically. So I planned it all out.
Right.
I just never got around to doing it. And it was just after, what was it? It was at the end of my first contract here in China, maybe the end of my second one. How many have I done? 3 so far, going into my fourth. So then, yeah, that would have been 2018 that I was thinking about doing it, and then I just never got around to doing it. So I was like, you know what? I'd rather be back in Canada visiting family than getting arrested for taking pictures of Area 51 signs. Yeah.
Yeah, imagine that.
But I'm guessing you've never been interested to go. You don't care.
Remember, I don't drive, so I go to places only where I can either find a ride or where I can walk. And I haven't done my walk across the United States quite yet.
Oh, well, you could start there, but they do. There is a hostel or a hotel, I think, that can, or like a guest house or whatever, that will actually pick you up. I think they can arrange transport some sort between Las Vegas and the hostel, and then they can take you for a drive. There's a little tour that you can do. It's like a 3-day tour or something like that. I looked, yeah, it was
Wow.
because the reason I was looking into doing that was because the cost of me renting a car, because I do drive, it's one of the silly things that I do, or rather, I keep on renewing
Right.
my Canadian driver's license, which, I mean, I don't need, but if I ever get a Chinese license, which is on the docket to do, then it's easier for me to actually get it as a result. And it's honored in the United States. So if I rented a car, it was going to cost me like X amount of money to go drive and fuel and all this other stuff. But then the tour was like a couple $100s or something. And I was like, well, you know, on a cost basis, it's almost the same thing. But would I rather have the freedom of doing it, or would I rather have someone take me around and know exactly where to go and where not to go and where not to point your camera so you don't get arrested? But yeah, maybe next year when the coronavirus has disappeared magically, who knows?
Well, okay. See, in part, that is what happens. A disease literally just basically disappears. Trump was right to that extent, but more he was referring to how the media was handling it. And if you might remember, when the protests and the riots started at the end of May, the coronavirus problem just disappeared for like about a month. You have all of these people who were not social distancing and not wearing masks, okay? But all of a sudden, we didn't hear about coronavirus deaths. We didn't hear about the numbers about how many were recently infected. We didn't hear about hospitals getting filled up. It literally disappeared for a month. And then, it came back.
Then it
I
came
think
back.
beginning of July.
Yeah, amazing how that happens. Yeah, you do touch on a point that I've sort of told other people about, but they don't seem to be very willing to discuss this at all, that, yeah, I think I don't deny the coronavirus. I don't deny COVID. I don't deny that people are dying and that it is a problem. But I do sort of cast a skeptical eye at the issue of coronavirus, particularly as it's hitting the United States and parts of Europe, the developed world, and in places that have the freest of free medias. Whereas the places that don't have free medias, and we don't have to mention them by name, that they don't have a problem with the coronavirus as much. At least it doesn't seem so. So I don't know. But, you know,
Yeah,
election
it's an
year,
amazing thing.
election year in the United States, I listen to a few podcasts and see a few things. I kind of go, you know, if it was a Democrat in the White House, I wonder if this would be as big of a deal as it is.
Well, you might remember back in 2009, right? 2009, there was a SARS bit going on.
SARS
I know
bit.
because
SARS, yes, there was an outbreak. I think I don't call it a bit. They call it an outbreak.
well, so I was engaged to my first wife, and she was pregnant with our son, and they were in China, and I'd gone to Oman to work.
Mm-hmm.
And my contract ended. I went to America. It was the summer. It was July. And then when I was corresponding with her, setting up a plan to come back, all right, she was telling me how the Chinese media was telling everybody that SARS was gone in China and it was only foreigners bringing it back into the country. Oh, H1N1, that's right. It wasn't SARS, it was H1N1.
It's bird
right,
flu.
it was H1N1. And so I had to stay away from her for a couple of weeks after I get back to China because I was going to bring H1N1 from America to her.
Right. And it hadn't really hit the United States as hard. It hit Toronto. I remember that. That was that, because SARS was early 2000s. I remember when
You're right.
That hit Toronto, and that was a big deal. But there wasn't the same lockdown that that I hear that's going on in Winnipeg now. And then, yeah, the avian flu, where was I? I was in South Korea at that time, I think, 2008, 2009. Was that after Obama was elected?
Yeah, Obama was elected in 2008.
Right.
So he's already president.
Right. So I was in South Korea by that time already, and I don't remember it being, I mean, it was an issue, but I don't remember lockdowns happening. It wasn't a big deal.
We must have just missed one another.
I was there from February, for 1 year, starting February 2009. And that's it.
Okay. I was there all of November 2008.
I was in Chicago at that time. I was there when Obama got elected. I was in Grant Park. I was at one of the hotels. And it was like, I was looking down and he was like this big so I had my little Sony Ericsson camera that I had to zoom in. And I have a picture of him giving a speech. He looks like a little pixelated dot, but that is,
of course,
Obama, according to my camera. But yeah, there was another person that we worked with that actually was in South Korea about 6 or 7 years ago, and I think I just missed him as well. But South Korea used to be the feeder ground, right? That's where a lot of English teachers went to go to earn money, to get jobs, and to get qualified as well.
Yeah. I started off quite a bit young, and so I was before most of our colleagues, I think, when we got in terms of getting into the ESL field out in the Far East anyway.
Mm-hmm. So when did you start? Like what age?
Well, so I'd finished college a year early, so I just turned 21. And
Mm-hmm.
All right, I got into high school and college in Kansas, and you can conjure up your own stereotypes with that. It was probably well-fitting, especially someone who doesn't drive. Not exactly worldly, okay.
Okay.
So, yeah, I went to Harbin, China in August of 2004, and that was my first experience teaching at 2 high schools there. But, well, like you, I was actually following a similar path. I'd wanted to become a classicist as well.
Oh,
and I was looking to go
What an idea that is.
Well, yes. Okay. So no fortune to be made, to be certain.
But Kansas has a respectable classics program, and I'm actually not surprised to hear that.
Well, University of Kansas is all right. I went to the other large public university, Kansas State,
Oh,
but I was looking to go to UCLA actually.
okay.
But as a public university, I'd have to pay in-state tuition.
Hmm.
Well, at that time, I'd have to pay out-of-state tuition because I had graduated from high school in Kansas, right? So I'd have to reestablish residency, but that would require a couple of year process. So I'd move back to California to teach at high school to start the process. Then they tell me you can't do that anymore. And so I go off to China to try to figure out what to do.
Hmm.
And then I realized, wait a minute, this is a job where people will pay me to come to their country. They'll pay for my medical insurance, my housing, my utilities. And right now, all I'm doing is just teaching conversational English at high school. You know, I have 0 office hours. I take it seriously. All right. I do prep, but they want me to teach the same lesson 17 times a week.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, it takes me 1 hour to prep and then I just do the same thing. I have an ungodly amount of spare time. I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, I could turn this into a career. This is easy. I don't have a lot. I don't carry a lot. Let's go. And that's what started it.
So what did you graduate with? Like, what was your degree when you left college?
So I was a dual major. I'd studied mathematics and I'd studied history.
Oh, okay. But was your history sort of focused towards the classics, or was it
Oh,
not?
no.
Okay.
Our history department had all of 130 people. It was about the same size as the math department now that I think about it.
That was more than the history department that I went to.
Well, where did you go?
I went to University of Manitoba, and like my in the city that I lived in, basically, like I've told other people, like my high school bus went one way, my university bus went the other way. So like in September when I graduated high school, after I graduated high school, instead of taking this bus, I just took the other bus to university, and that was it. But I mean, that's what most of my friends were doing, and that's what my family was doing.
Well, your town had a bus, all right? Manhattan, Kansas, without the university, right? When the university was out of session, there was only 20 or 25,000 people. When the university was active, it was 50,000. I mean,
Oh, okay.
It's what you'd expect.
Right. So it wasn't very many people. Yeah. I mean, Winnipeg's, I guess it's a proper city. There's 700,000, 800,000 people there, right?
It's got a hockey team.
Well,
right?
now
it's got a hockey team again?
Again, yes, finally. That was a big deal. When they left, it was a big problem as well. But they left because what was happening in the NHL, that was when they were expanding down into the southern United States, like Phoenix, Los Angeles.
Vegas.
Well, Vegas came a lot later. But there was a problem with salary caps. Like Winnipeg couldn't afford to buy any of the good players. And so they were just stuck with, up and coming people all the time. But then those people would get good and they'd get traded or drafted or like taken away basically. The one guy that was really famous that played for the Jets towards when like later on was Timo Solani.
Yes, of course.
And anytime you meet someone from Finland, they're all like, "Oh yeah, Winnipeg. I know where Winnipeg is." I'm like, that's why they know. That's why they know there's a city called Winnipeg in Canada.
Yeah, so they're sort of like the Oakland A's.
I have no idea. Who are the Oakland A's?
Oh no. Oh, okay, you're not familiar.
Never saw the movie. Never.
All right. So what happened was, now I also lived in the Bay Area, so I was a fan of the A's rather than the Giants.
Ooh.
And the A's in the late 90s and early 2000s, they developed a system of developing their own way of assessing players on AAA teams or on college teams, and using different matrices to evaluate players and try to get them onto the team when they were cheap, as it were. And so they wound up, they were like the third or fourth lowest payroll in all of MLB, but they got to the playoffs like 3 or 4 years consecutively and had 2 or 3 20 win season pitchers. But like what happened with Winnipeg, when their contracts ended, their time in Oakland ended.
But Oakland kept their team. Winnipeg didn't.
Yes.
I just like for all it's worth though, like with the NHL and then even in comparison to baseball down in the States, like baseball has a much more dedicated following, and to be fair, the weather is far better in more of the states than it is in Canada. And I mean, one of the weird things about the NHL expanding to the desert was like, it's not hockey weather ever in the desert. Why are you putting a hockey team there? But they had the money and they could build the arenas, where in Canada, it was like, it was getting to be a larger proportion than what Canada itself could sustain. Like Quebec lost their team. Who else lost their team?
Right.
Because there's been talk about putting a team into Saskatoon or Regina, but never happened, because even though combined, those cities would have as much as a baseball city in the States. It just wasn't financially attractive to the organization. So even though Canada, being a hockey country that it is, and the northern states, especially like that whole New York, Buffalo, Boston area, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the homeland of the NHL right there.
Yeah, the original six, right?
Yeah.
Chicago, Detroit, Boston, the Rangers, the Canadiens, and the Maple Leafs.
Yeah. And then then Ottawa joined later on, I think, a little bit, but the Senators it was. But then they lost their team, and then they got him back again, and then they almost lost him again, and then they got him back again.
And at one point in time, actually, right, the Toronto had two hockey teams at one point, actually.
This is news to me. No.
Yeah, well, because, certainly, go back. The original professional hockey leagues that incorporate both American and Canadian teams goes back, I think, to like the 1900s or the 19-teens. My mom gave me a book on NHL history, like 93 or 94.
Right.
And, well, that was when she gave it to me. But it was all of the history of the NHL. And there were a lot of Canadian teams early on. Hamilton had a team, and there were small cities in America that also had professional hockey teams, but they died.
Professional, but not NHL. It was
but they played with the core that became the NHL, right? The original six. There was one more team. There's actually two teams in New York City. The New York Americans is what they were called. Then they went bankrupt, and then there were just those six. All right, what's called the original six. But they were playing with a whole bunch of others originally. And then those six were there from like sometime, I think, during the Depression for like 20 or 30 years, I guess, to the 60s.
Yeah, it wasn't very much, but yeah, like the NHL as it is known today, like that was a different organization than those other clubs that were playing. There were professional teams, but there wasn't that sort of national hockey league that came later as it incorporated more teams and more cities throughout the like basically Western North America.
Yeah.
But and even with that, I mean, I'm surprised that the eastern provinces of Canada don't have teams. They do, but they don't have one in the NHL. And again, it's because it's not financially attractive to the NHL.
Well, that's something I'm just tangentially aware of. I mean, I know there's the IHL, there's the AHL, there's the ECHL. But haven't some of these gone defunct by now also?
Some of them have. I had a cousin who played in Dallas, Texas in one of the leagues there. And I'm like, I didn't know there was a league, but the States, I think, has more. It's not college. It's a step up from college because they're no longer students, but they're still like considered professional. There's also another guy the younger brother of this girl I went to school with. Mm-hmm. He is playing in Europe. And this is one thing that was always sort of restricted to Saturday afternoon TV. I remember watching this European hockey. It was terrible, and it was overly advertised. Like, I think people say that the NHL has lots of advertisements, but the European just sold every inch of the sweaters, of the rinks, of the TV screen. It was just rife with advertising. And I don't think I was at all attracted to it, other than the fact that it was just hockey, right? And it was okay, it's something to watch, but it was always Saturday afternoon. But he's playing there now, and he's getting paid to be a professional hockey player there.
Now, I haven't seen much hockey in probably 15 or 20 years, but I remember watching the Winter Olympics up through like 2002 or 2006, and the European style and the North American style is a bit different. The North American style is a lot more physical. All right, they're happy to start beating on people, whereas the Europeans are a lot more graceful. And I don't know if that's still true, and I don't know if the guy who, who's playing in Europe has had to adjust his playing style, or is he in the penalty box a lot?
That's I don't think he is, but I know in North America they have moved away from the uber violence that used to overtake the sport. Like when I was growing up, 80s and 90s, there was Don Cherry, who got in trouble a couple of years ago for saying the words "you people." He got in trouble for this, and he lost his position on CBC. But he was one of these guys, like, let him fight, like, that's a good fight, that's a good body check. He was all for the physicality of the game. But that has gone down substantially. Because what happened was that, and he was saying this before, he was a proponent of this, like, the reason why the hockey can't get any better is because there aren't any more enforcers. And if there's no enforcers, that means your superstars are going to get taken out by one of the cheap shots, right? Like to the knees or whatever. So as soon as they put in like an instigation rule where, well, that's what they had. They had an instigation rule, but the enforcers couldn't enforce, protection on the stars. They changed another rule at some point. I don't know the history, the last 10, 15 years, where it basically said, now we're going to clamp down on all this violence and all the checking, like making sure that the checks are clean checks and that people, specifically the superstars, not just the regular guy, but the superstars,
right,
aren't getting injured and being taken out of the game, because people don't go pay to watch a bunch of, people skating around. They want to see that guy who's that good, who does, oh my God, can you believe he just did that? It's like the NFL, same thing. It's like you pay to see that spectacle.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's the old joke, of course, there was a fight and a hockey game broke out during it, right?
Yeah, something like that.
I remember, like you were saying, you'd have enforcers. So I was also an early San Jose Sharks fan. And
I remember when they finally entered the NHL. One of the best logos ever.
Great logo, crappy team. But that said, Link Gates, all right, he was averaging 300 penalty minutes a season.
That's a lot.
Okay, that's between 3 and 4 minutes a game.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and so, yeah, that's what people were looking forward to, right? This was still the time when they didn't wear helmets, some of them, right? Because they'd been grandfathered in. There were a lot of players. I mean, like Mark Messier, Wayne Gretzky, a lot of the guys who'd started in the late 70s still could have worn helmets, and some of them did. Excuse me, not worn helmets, excuse me.
Right.
You're right.
I don't know. I don't remember that being when the San Jose Sharks joined. That was,
sure,
I thought by that time, the only guy that I sort of remember, it was like for the Montreal Canadiens. It wasn't Lafleur. Was it Lafleur? There was another guy that I remember. Was it McInnes? One of the guys with the big mustaches. I remember that. He was like one of the last people I remember seeing not wearing a helmet during a hockey game. But other than that, by the time I was like cognizant of life and the NHL and all the other teams, everyone was wearing helmets anyway. I remember when they put the guards around the goaltenders' necks, the extra plastic, not just the helmet, but then the extra plastic chin that they attached to the helmets, because a goaltender died in one of these, not the NHL, but another league, after he got a puck to the throat. He basically choked to death.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
I remember that being the reason I remember it, because it was shocking to me. It was like, holy shit, people die during these games, and you go see an NHL game in real life, and you see the goaltender get hit, and that back in the early 90s, like those goaltenders were getting bounced around. Like we saw the goaltender leave the crease, it was like smack into him, basically take him out. Nowadays, you can't touch them. If you touch them, you're into the box with 2 minutes, which is why all those penalty minutes go up, because there are so many more infractions that are put in place, which, is for the safety of the players and to make the superstars who draw the ticket sales. Yeah,
you bring up also, again, Ron Hextall was
Hextall, yes,
Philadelphia Flyers goaltender, and he got into fights with the other players, and on occasion he got into fights with the other goalie. He'd skate down to mid-rink, and the other goalie. His favorite player to go up against, of course, was Patrick Waugh, right?
Yeah.
Who was with the Canadiens and then later with the Avalanche.
Yeah. And he was a great player. I mean, they were on Hextall.
Both of them.
Did Philadelphia win as many Stanley Cups though? Because as soon as Patrick Waugh left Canadiens, he went on that streak of 6 Stanley Cups with the Avalanche or something.
But, right, he played with the Avalanche and then later the Red Wings.
Right.
And he got 1 or 2 with the Avalanche, and then I think he was there for like 3 of the Red Wings.
No,
Cups.
Patrick Waugh wasn't Detroit Red Wings. No.
Who am I thinking of then?
Oh, who was it? Oh, and that goaltender is going to listen to this podcast. He's going to be like, "You douchebags! How dare you forget my name?"
Well, I mean, I know Chris Osgood was one of their goalies, but they had another one, right? Because Detroit used 2 goalies rather than 1, and they split the season. They'd each play about 40 games, and then they trade off, even through the finals. I mean, it was a great system. But Hextall, yeah, the Flyers won 3 or 4 Stanley Cups in the late 70s and like 80, because then you've got well, the Islanders won some at that time, and then of course you got Wayne Gretzky winning his with the Oilers.
Yeah. But Gretzky, he won with the Oilers in the 80s, not into the late 90s. Like by the time Avalanche came around and Detroit were good, I mean, Gretzky was basically on the way out. He tried to win. Did he ever win with the Rangers? Because did he ever play for the Rangers?
Right. Well, what happened was the Los Angeles Kings bought out his contract along with Paul Coffey and 1 or 2 others.
Oh, yeah. That was a big problem in Canada. Canada was like, how dare you? You sold out. And he's sitting there going, yeah, I got a lot of money for this. Learn, kids.
and when the Canadians did the Canadians win the Cup this last decade? Because if not, then the last time they won was 93, and that was against the Kings. All right. So Gretzky played up against the Canadians, and the Canadians won. Messier was also left Edmonton, and he went to the Rangers, and the Rangers won the Cup in 94, but it was out Gretzky. Gretzky later went to the Rangers, and they got to the playoffs, but not his last season, but they did get the playoffs, but, first round, second round, and that was it.
Right. All right, so I'm just looking at Patrick Waugh here. He never played for Detroit. No. Colorado Avalanche from 96 to 2003.
And his last season was 03?
During the Avalanche Red Wings brawl, 1997, he fought Red Wings goaltender Mike Vernon.
Vernon was the other one. Okay, Osgood.
And then he fought Chris Osgood the next season. But no, I don't think he ever played. He played against Detroit, but he never played for them. Doesn't look like it. Yeah. Sure. So anyway, just checking that. President's Trophy. Yeah. No, I guess that's what it is. That they played against Detroit in the late 90s, and that was sort of a big rivalry. And so from there, Detroit basically took over the dynasty afterwards. I guess. Wow, you do not strike me as a sports person, yet you seem to have a lot of knowledge about sports. I'm by no means a sports person at all anymore. My younger brother is the person who takes care of all that, looks into it and everything. He's probably screaming at this going, no, that's not how it goes, man. You're getting it wrong. But because you said you haven't watched hockey since in 15 years, which sort of allies with your timeline to come to China. Because that's one reason why I don't watch any sports anymore. Is like when I went to South Korea, it not only was the time difference terrible, it was just like it wasn't part of the thought process anymore. Like leaving North America, that you're not in hockey country, you're not in any sports country other than maybe soccer or football. But what sports do Asian countries like? I mean, South Korea would be Taekwondo. China, it's like ping pong and badminton.
Maybe Japan and Taiwan, it's baseball.
Yeah, okay, but yes, Japan would be more baseball. Like if you went to Japan, then you could go see a baseball game that would be similar to what you would see in North America, at least maybe. Same with Taiwan, but I mean, South Korea, I don't recall people. Well, they did. What was it? That was when the Olympics were in Vancouver that year. in 2010. That's what it
Okay.
was. So that would have been the only reason. Oh, figure skating. That's why South Korea was interested in
Yeah.
the Winter Olympics, was because of, was it Lee, not Lena, the other girl. Oh, the South Koreans are going to be mad at me. I've forgotten her name. Yuna. That was her name. Yuna. She was very famous amongst the school children that I was teaching at that time. But yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
Harbin, 20 years ago, basically. You came 2004. And I mean, I was there last year. What's changed? I mean, what do you see has
Well,
changed?
so of course I visited it through our job,
Yeah.
right? Our job. But I need to be clear. So I lived in the southernmost district, all right? And so it is like 45 minutes or an hour away from the heart of the city. And so I was almost never in the main part of the city. I was in this tiny area called Pingfong. And so are you familiar with Unit 731, the Japanese unit for World War
No,
II?
no.
Okay, so it makes the German doctors look nice,
Oh, okay.
right?
It's one of
It
these
was,
stories.
yeah, yeah. So they would, for example, cut off your limbs and then attach your right limb where your left limb was, and so on. Or they take local Chinese and leave them bare naked. And mind you, it would get to be negative 30 or 40 degrees during the winter there, and throw water on them.
Right.
They would put them into early style large vacuums and see what happens. So anyway, I lived 100 meters from where this went down, and they have a museum there, UNESCO Museum. And so my high school students, one of them even took me there, and they
Hmm.
have things in Chinese and in English. And see, they had human life-size replications.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I thought that I understood why they did it, but I also thought that it was disgusting at the level which they were doing it. And
Right.
clearly it was propaganda. I mean, my students at the school, they referred to the Japanese as animals. And I didn't waste my time arguing with them, right? I didn't bring up Japan in class or anything like that, but sometimes a student might do it, but I didn't even try, right?
Right.
Because they were so emotional about it, because they were telling me, oh yeah, well, Denny, we go up there every school year, middle school and high school.
Hmm.
Yeah, well, what was I going to say to them? Oh, yeah, you know what happened to those doctors? The American government got them out of there before Chinese tribunals could put them to death. I wasn't going to tell them that.
So what happened to those doctors? Are they now gainfully employed in the United States, as what's happened with the German
Yeah,
scientists?
that's pretty much what happened. That is pretty much what happened. Because you have to remember, unlike with the Germans being literally conquered at the end of World War II, right? You had the American, British, Soviet, French, everyone holding hands in the middle of Germany. That didn't happen with Japan, all right? Okay,
Right.
Okinawa was invaded, but proper Japan was not invaded. In fact, they
Right.
still held substantial portions of China and the Koreas and Vietnam during that time. So it made a lot more sense to play nice, for the lack of a better word, with the Japanese.
Right.
Especially, we didn't want the Soviets coming in and trying to take more. We wanted to get this done as quickly as possible.
I think that
And
was more
so
it is.
them
It was a
deals.
race against the Soviets but the Soviet Union wasn't much of a threat to the states at that point just yet, because the Soviet Union had just got fucked over by Germany with World War II. Like, they got double crossed basically. So they were sort of on guard against just about everybody who wasn't Soviet at that point. But this is the first I've heard
Realistically,
about Unit 751,
731.
731. Okay.
Yeah.
This is news to me. I've never heard this before.
And also through this unit, they developed aerosolizing, I guess is the term, the bubonic plague and other things,
Oh, the
right? And
bubonic
dumping
plague.
lights on Chinese people. I mean, they were the forefront in unconventional warfare, more so than the Germans.
Right. So where were they getting these ideas from, though? Because like the Germans were sort of like they did some pretty horrid things as well. I mean, you have Jewish ancestry. I'm
Yeah,
sure that the stories have gone down through the generations. But I mean, where are the Japanese getting these ideas from? Their whole
I
history.
don't
I
know.
mean, they have this very brutal history, and I think at the end of World War II was sort of when they sort of said, or the rest of the world said, don't do that anymore, please. Just stop doing that.
Well, you bring up a good point, right? I mean, World War I saw the first real use of chemical warfare in a conventional war. All right, mustard gas was used on the front lines, and I don't, I studied that era, but I don't remember seeing anything like the Geneva Convention saying no, 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 you can't do this anymore.
Right.
I don't remember seeing that as such. Not that I think rules of war really make a lot of sense anyway.
It doesn't make sense. Exactly. There's what rules of war are you talking about? Like, it just rules of war. What are these? I mean, yeah, the Geneva Convention's basically your old gentleman's agreement. It's like, when a guy's reloading his gun, don't shoot him. Wait until he reloads, and then you both have a fair shot of shooting each other. You're going, what? No. When he reloads, you shoot the guy.
That's one of the reasons why John Wayne never liked any of Clint Eastwood's movies, because John Wayne wanted the West, always to be, the good guy is always the good guy. Right. All right. There's always an ethical side. Whereas with the Clint Eastwood movies, Clint Eastwood he's not an anti-hero, but he's not necessarily the hero. He's just the person we follow along. And if you don't have any bullets, that's fine by him. He's still going to shoot you. Whereas with John Wayne, no, he wants a fair fight.
Yeah,
we don't fight wars that way.
Is that sort of the speaking of the times, the sign of the times, basically? How that character John Wayne changed. He was sort of the convivial, congenial old cowboy man. The safe man. He had a bit of a gruff streak, but he was still, he would never hurt a lady. He would never do this. He would never do that. He was never a savage, even though, the way that he's portrayed is, it's a little washed. Whitewashed, yes. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just looking here at the law of war. International law regulates conditions for war, conduct of warring parties, which doesn't make any sense. I mean, I guess the big thing would be under the rules of war would be like the treatment of prisoners of war. I think that would be where it's sort of don't kill our people, we won't kill yours, sort of thing. Like, if we have an agreement, then it becomes like more about money or sort of like scientific knowledge and stuff like that. But this idea that, he's reloading his gun, I'll let him load first before I shoot him. I don't think so. Well, yeah. But I mean, yeah, the Chinese do not like the Japanese. There is a deep-seated hatred, especially amongst the older generations. The younger generation, I don't see it as much. I don't know, maybe you're seeing it differently, and I've had this conversation with some other people, but it doesn't seem that they have as much animosity towards them. Well, I don't know, what do you see?
So when I was living in China, on and off over the years, right, I started in 2004, I just left right this year, 2020. Mm-hmm. Over those 16 years, I've spent about 9 years altogether in China, like 5 or 6 different cities living.
That's a long time.
But I really researched, right, to make sure I understood the Western portrayal and then also the Chinese portrayal of quite a few things. Tiananmen, Tibet, but also Chinese relations with Japan, because, during the times we've been there, every so often, the Chinese government will trump up some nonsensical thing that apparently some Japanese person said, and then they'll go around egging Japanese cars, maybe burn a few, and the Japanese will say, I'm sorry, and then, a few years later it'll happen again.
When did they ever burn cars of Japanese cars?
The last time it happened was just like 4 or 5 years ago in Beijing. Not a lot, but yeah, I mean, well, anyway, I looked into this, and so after the communists took over China, all right, in 49, in the early 50s, the Japanese government extended an olive branch to the Chinese government and paid reparations. And Mao Zedong actually had good relations with the Communist Party of Japan. Now, this was after the U.S. forces had basically left. They were only in Okinawa. But what he did was he explained to the Chinese people, and it was the Communist Party's policy in China to say that the Japanese are now our friends. Okay, things were bad, but they were trying to keep influence out, all right,
Right.
Western influence out. And what happened was after he died, after Mao Zedong died, Deng Xiaoping undid this. All right.
Okay.
They went after the Japanese again. And again, something that a lot of people mess up on is that in the 1980s, the Japanese government again gave grants, all right, not loans, they gave grants worth in the billions of dollars now to the Chinese government. And the Chinese government almost never recognizes it. And the Japanese government has properly and officially apologized, I don't remember, a dozen times. So yeah, they've gotten tired of doing it.
Yeah, but like Japan, South Korea still has a problem with Japan in that regard too, because Japan has apologized, but then they keep on. Where is it? There's was it the emperor or the prime minister of Japan who keeps going to the shrine to the
Prime
war,
Minister.
right? So it's not the emperor, but the prime minister goes to the shrine and he keeps on paying tribute to these fallen heroes that Japan calls them heroes. So that keeps on bothering South Korea and China to no end. I mean, and it doesn't look like Japan's ever going to stop doing that.
But the problem is that sort of like in Arlington, we have a large cemetery for the fallen in American wars. It goes not only to World War II. All right, there's the problem, is that it's a recognition of Japanese who've died over hundreds of years. All right, and so no, but that's really how it's treated in Japan. It's not just a site for people who died in World War II.
So it's he's going to pay respect to all the soldiers, not just the ones from that. Has that ever that has to have been made clear before? So
of course.
Well, but then how come the American media isn't jumping on that and promoting it? Does the Japanese media promote it? I mean, I don't know.
As much as the Japanese, the thing is, it doesn't matter if the Japanese media promotes it or not. The question is are the Koreans going to care or believe it? Or the Chinese going to care or believe it?
That's true.
And then as for trusting the validity of the media and what they say, I mean, in the era of fake news, Trump and Twitter.
Well, but that's okay. You bring up a good point, because is that a modern construct, or is this something that's been lifelong? I just watched The Social Dilemma, and this Netflix documentary, and there's this younger guy who used to work for Facebook or one of them, and he says this is a new era, this is a new level of these companies are researching ways to keep you addicted to this program. And then at one point he's at this press conference, and this older guy is like, this is the same thing that happened with newspapers and to TV. I mean, we will adapt and we will learn to deal with these things. I mean, are you saying that this has always been like this, or is it this time?
Well, all right. So I can speak about this too, right? People are saying how presidential politics in election years have just gotten dirtier and dirtier in terms of the language.
Oh, yeah.
But, okay, so actually not so fast, all right? So the first election in the United States, 1792, of course, everyone's going to vote for George Washington, right? That's a no-brainer. Similarly, 1796. Okay, first competitive election, 1800, between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, right? These guys had known each other for years. They'd written the Declaration of Independence together. Adams had been the vice president. Thomas Jefferson had been the Secretary of State. And by that point, they had come to completely hate the other's politics. And they were serious. They really thought that the other guy would mean that it'd be a dictatorship and the fall of the United States. And they each had their own newspapers printing stuff, all right? All the way back in 1800. I could only guess that, if you go back, you'll find, of course, that as much as a place had competitive government, right, where it wasn't an autocrat, then you probably did have something like this, and the newspapers getting involved then too. The thing is that this idea of getting people addicted, right? You had to be educated enough to actually read the paper. All right. And then
Mhm.
during this time, you had to spend more time in your life just worrying about having food and other things like that. I mean, a lot of people forget, one of the brilliant things about capitalism is we got a whole lot of spare time that people 200 years didn't have.
That's true. We got a lot of time to be doing all sorts of things. I mean, in general, life has gotten better, but tell it to someone who's been unemployed for 8 months and they're going to look at you and go, yeah, then why is my life so shit right now?
Well, that's also the state, but that's coming from an anarchist. But also, talking about how the media influences people. If you look at how the United States got to war with the Spanish for the Spanish-American War, the catalyst supposedly was the USS Maine blowing up in the harbor of Havana, and the press, the American media, really wanted to go to war. And there was a strong desire to have an American empire. And by the time the truth came out, that it was probably an ammo explosion and that it was not the Spanish who did it, we were invading the Philippines and
Oops.
Cuba and Puerto Rico. And so that's why I'm going to Fiji. Seriously, you've got the deep fakes, right? You've got the deep fakes, and now you can use programs on computers. You've got enough recordings of somebody speaking, you can get them to say anything. And between that and the deep fakes with people, you can start a war with this.
Not yet. No.
Not yet,
no.
but soon.
And one of the things with that, because I know, what was that movie? Forrest Gump. They did that with two of the historical characters. Was it McCartney and
several?
One of the
They
presidents?
had Nixon, they had Lenin, Kennedy.
Right. Yeah, not Paul McCartney. Sorry, whoops, I'm getting that wrong. But yes, but that technology, I agree that it's a threat, but it's not possible for Joe Schmo to pull that off just yet. And that's what, like right now, the biggest thing isn't editing people into saying something that they haven't said. The biggest thing is, instigating somebody, capturing their response, and only posting what looks to be one side of the story without saying, oh, well, but this led up to that, to that, to that. And you're sort of ignoring, the neighborhood or in the whole political setup that happened behind it. Oh, and the fact that, there's a system here that rewards clicks. And so the more you click on something, the more it trends, which feeds the advertising. So I mean, there's a system there that you're not taking all of that into account with when you're looking at that sort of fake news, that trending, that viralness.
I agree with you to an extent. So 3 weeks ago, the Caucasus got rowdy, right? Azerbaijan and Armenia have been at it now for 3 weeks. And it's not getting very much press coverage, but the Russians are on one side, the Turks and the Syrians are on another. Mm-hmm. The Israelis are actually were selling arms to the Muslim, right? Azerbaijan's a Muslim country. They were selling arms to the Azerbaijani, but have stopped, I guess. The Turks, they like killing Armenia. Can I say that on your podcast?
Well, it's your opinion, your take on these things.
Okay, well. So the Turks did not succeed in their in the annihilation of the Armenians last century. It seems like they're geared up for this century.
That brings up a good point, actually, which is like people. You said that things have changed, like in terms of how Trump, this whole new lifestyle. But what we are seeing, and I've seen this and I think this is something that a lot of people who travel see quite a bit, is that old style, these pockets of violence that happen when you say that you want to travel to somewhere. People say, oh, don't go. If someone has never traveled before, they're going to tell you, oh, you can't go there, it's dangerous. But then you get closer to the country and you go into a hostel and they're like, yeah, just don't go in this area and you'll be fine. And what a lot of that is, and especially the other thing that happens, that when you meet someone from that country, and I speak of like Syrians, Iranians, Iraqis, Muslims, like any sort of Buddhists from Malaysia,
Burma.
And Burma as well. You meet any of these people and they go, yeah, there are issues, but I mean, the whole country's not like that. I mean, what you see flaring up in the media is just like every now and then. And then you realize like what's happening with a lot of these places is that there are pockets that have been disputed for a long time, a very long time. But what's happening is that they're now meeting the viral trending of social media, and this is spilling out into the American mainstream public that then has to fight the good fight and, spread democracy and freedom for all. And you're kind of forgetting that they were doing well. It's just that they have some other issues that are going on, and they don't necessarily want, social mediaites in Los Angeles telling them how they should live their life. Or am I wrong? Am I wrong on my interpretation of this?
So I lived out on the East Coast, up in the Northeast, New York, New Jersey. I lived in Kansas and I lived in California. All right. And depending on who I'm talking to, I either identify with California or Kansas. And generally I identify more with Kansas. Look, Kansas hate people from LA, New York telling them how to live. I can only imagine what it must be like for people who are not American to have to deal with it.
But everyone wants to move to the States. I mean, I think it's fair to say that if you ever go to a hostel and you have 16 people from 16 different countries, most of those people, 12, 13, will say, if I had the chance, I would move to the United States of America.
And, it really pains me and it really frustrates me. I am a true American patriot, but I want to be clear what I mean by this. I believe.
Please do, because the analyzer, the vocal analyzer, has now flagged this conversation, and now I'm gonna get dinged on Twitter or something. Okay, so what do you mean?
So, all right, people go on about how some Americans anyway, are too arrogant, that there's not very much that's exceptional about America or the American experience. And what they don't appreciate is that, okay, to be certain, the foundations of the American Republic were built on the ideas of Scots, of Englishmen, of Frenchmen, right? I'm not going to contest this point. My point, though, is what makes the United States exceptional compared to almost every other single country in the world, especially at that time. It was the first country where the government was intentionally planned. All right, where you could sit down and say, these are going to be our principles. And our principles are going to be, you don't get your rights from government, from other people. You have them because you are human. All right.
Okay.
Whether you get it from God or from nature, which is very clear, right? A lot of the people who were there at the beginning, all right, who were writing it, a lot of them were Christian, a lot of them were deists, right? And that's why they said nature. But the point is, this idea where you're not getting it from a sovereign, you're not getting it at the sufferance of somebody else. No, it is yours. It's not an entitlement. It is inherent. And all right, it wasn't perfect, right? At the very beginning, in a lot of states, women could technically vote if they had enough property. Actually, even blacks in the North voted at the very beginning. They had enough property.
How much?
Well, it was certainly a high bar. But the point was, but the bar was high in terms of property, but it was still a novel idea. It hadn't been done before. All right. And as time went by, more and more people, I mean, it wasn't until the 1840s where an average white man could vote. All right. The property requirements were that high. And so the fact that in just 25 years, well, actually 28 years, right, in 1868, blacks got the right to vote. All right. So if you consider that most whites weren't even truly enfranchised until the mid-19th century. And then black men, not long afterwards. It's actually quite remarkable. And then the fact that women were completely no, I can't remember the word is to be given the right to vote, enfranchised.
Okay.
By 1920, if you look at it at a sociological point of view, that's very fast. 70 years between basically all men and all women.
Well, I'd have to say it's not fast. I'd say that's not fast at all.
Compared to human history, how long could consider? All right, when we talk about voting, we go back to the ancient Greek city-states, right? And then it disappeared for a while, basically. And it wasn't that many who were voting.
Well, Rome was a republic. They voted in Rome.
Very few did. There were very high property requirements. And you also had to serve in the military.
You had to show up basically to vote. That was it. And but to actually
Not
go to
in,
Rome and show up and to vote meant that you had money, so someone could take care and protect your farm and your
also
family.
the only people who would vote were actually if they were Italian. All right. If they were from the provinces, they didn't vote.
They couldn't. They were too far away. They couldn't get
No,
to the
but they
city.
weren't allowed to. No. If they were even to go there, they couldn't vote. It was restricted to within what is modern day Italy.
Right. But the politics of Rome and of ancient Greece aren't what people are debating these days when they are saying that Black Lives Matter, when they are saying women, equality, transgender rights, all these different rights, Trump is a moron and he should be taken out for some reason. I mean, they're talking about the United States of America as it is right now. So basically the 0 point would have to be, we North Americans might say the 0 point has to be 1776. However, the British might come along and say, yes, that's a very good point to talk about because that was a war when you guys fought us. So for the British to actually get into the conversation, which would be kind of funny to have someone else take that side of the argument. I mean, 1776, only some people were allowed to vote. So you're saying that it was relatively quick, but it wasn't because in 1776, not everybody could vote.
But it is. If you look at the advancement of these ideas, right, the Enlightenment was still going on when they adopted these ideas. It wasn't like it actually been tested yet. The American Republic was an experiment, and it worked. Frankly, the Constitution was flexible enough that it did get to the point where it was recognizing the rights of everybody. Right?
It just wasn't giving it to them.
Well, but see, the Constitution was never giving rights to anybody. All right. If you look at the things that are non-amendments, it explains the structure of the government and the function of the government. If you look at, say, for example, the Bill of Rights, it's a misnomer. Because if you go down and you read them, no, seriously, it says what the government cannot do.
So then
there's a big difference.
Okay, so what do they actually
talk about? Read the exact wording. Read the exact wording, right? Congress shall pass no law, all right, referring to the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, right of consciousness. Second Amendment, Congress shall pass no law dealing with arms, with guns. Third Amendment, dealing with the quartering of soldiers in your home. Rarely used, I admit, but very important at the time because we thought the British were going to come back and party.
Right.
Fourth Amendment, dealing with due process. I think I'm trying to see now. I haven't studied this in like 20 years. I'm not a lawyer.
Do you have to be a lawyer to know this? I mean, because when people talk
No, but I haven't. My point is I haven't used this information in a long time. And so when I start getting to like the Fifth or Sixth Amendments, I start forgetting exactly what they were about. But
can anyone remember if they're not a lawyer? You bring up a good point because I'm looking at this thing here. It says there's 10 amendments, and people on Twitter, and I'm one of these people who sort of, when they say, oh, it's a Bill of Rights, it's this issue, it's unconstitutional. I kind of scroll by that, go, okay, sure, whatever. I don't really understand the whole context of it because even in Canada, we don't have that same sort of history of like constitutional amendments and constitutional finagling, can I say? I don't think it ever becomes like it's a foundation of the nation issue. In Canada, one of the foundation of the nation's issues is dealing with Indigenous cultures and Indigenous treaties, the treaties that were struck with the Indigenous peoples. That is the big, problem that Canada deals with in terms of its foundation as a nation, as a country of its own. Whereas the States, I mean, it's this legal speak all the time. You can't tell me what to do. It's a free country, and I can have a gun if I want to have a gun because I'm a free man.
See, The rest of you chickens decided to stay as a part of the empire until they decided to grant it to you. Look, we invited you guys to come play with us, and you turned us down. Not once, but twice,
When was
right?
the second time?
War of 1812.
Oh, yeah, but then we burned your White House down.
Yes, yes, and we still won the war.
And again, it's one of those things that I have to say that I'm not very familiar with. You're saying that you haven't talked about the stuff or used this knowledge in a long time. My historical knowledge of Canada basically ended in like grade 10, grade 11 social studies. And since then, I have neglected it because I've been studying classics, why not? But then also in traveling, I find I learn a lot more about the world, and people still consider Canada to be this great place. And I was talking to Natalie, one of our colleagues here. She's planning to immigrate to Canada, and one of the gracious, elegant parts about being a Canadian is the respect that a lot of people give you and your country. But that, as a Canadian, and knowing a lot of Americans and having traveled only a little bit as an adult to the United States, but having traveled as an adult outside of North America, I go, a lot of what people say that's bad about the United States set up the framework for North America, that it is a place that you can move to, that you can gain a passport, you can make a new life for yourself, irregardless of your religion, your skin color. In theory, I know a lot of people are going to say that's not true, but you can move from somewhere else and start a new life in North America, no strings attached. You can't really do that elsewhere.
You bring up, another good point. When we look again at the foundation of the United States, we had people from many different European countries who had a variety of Christian, albeit, backgrounds, right? There were a few Jews, there were a few Muslims, to be certain, in the American colonies, but it was Protestant and Roman Catholic. And Canada was fairly similar. In fact, Canada, at least in the United States, the Dutch, the Germans, everyone basically played nice and learned English, with the exception of the Amish. But the Amish are always peaceful. You don't need to worry about them, right? They got their Dutch. Well, they are. They are. But in Canada, anyway, you had to integrate a whole society that is French speaking. And to an extent, it still hasn't really integrated some 300 years later.
And I think they would take offense to that. Like, how dare you say we have to integrate? Why didn't they integrate with it? Again, it's only because they lost a series of wars that basically pushed the border back to Quebec rather than Ontario. So, I mean, to think about how those wars took place, and again, this is grade 7, grade 8 social studies that were taught this. But I mean, how it did change. And then when I travel outside of Canada, people are like, oh yeah, you must speak French. I'm like, my French is terrible. It's embarrassing. It's horrible. And whenever I meet a Chinese kid and we've met them, I mean, we've taught them before, you go to grade 10, those kids, 12, 13 years old, 14 years old, what's his English is going to be like? He doesn't care about the language. He's being told by other people to learn it. He's like, I just want to play games and, chase girls, right? That's it. And the girls are like, I just want to avoid the boys. That's all. But with all of that, your grade 10 English is going to be shit. My grade 10 French, shit. I wish I could pick it up again, but I just don't see the need right now to pick up French once more. I'm learning Mandarin Chinese instead.
The frog's time in the sun is gone. Yeah, you don't need to worry about that.
But is that true though? Because a large part of Africa, like the parts that I want to go to, West Africa, they all still speak French, which is a product of French colonialism hundreds of years ago.
Right, but I think it depends. It depends on how influential the Middle East Arabs decide they want to play it out in North Africa and in West Africa. Because clearly the United States is withdrawing from the Middle East. They're going to have to learn to play nice either with the Israelis or with the Iranians. And it looks like they've chosen the Israelis, at least for the time being. but they are also aware of the fact that they can't rely on the Chinese, and they see the Chinese coming in Eastern Africa. All right.
Okay.
Do they really want the Chinese to expand into their influence into Western Africa? I mean, a lot of these countries are Muslim countries. A lot of these countries, they do speak Arabic. It would seem to be in their best interest to try to form an alliance, economic or otherwise, to keep the Chinese out. I think that that is how it will play out as there's less and less oil and natural gas in the Middle East. I mean,
whoa. So you're telling me that my kind of my ulterior motive of learning Mandarin Chinese is that I eventually want to be paid to be a translator between Mandarin Chinese and possibly French or English, and so I can have a paid trip around Africa. This isn't going to work because economic forces are going against this?
That's how reality works. Yes, economics always wins the day in the end.
That's balls. Well, then I'm just going to quit studying Chinese. Sorry, Sun Tzu, you're done. Art of War, finished. I'm not going to forget it. I'm reborn today. I'm not going to study Chinese anymore. That's it. What am I going to do with all my time, though?
Learn Arabic.
You know, I actually started. I did. I was learning. Started learning the basic sounds, like the basic vowels or whatever it was. And I'm sitting there going, "Oh my God, are you kidding me?" I got another writing system, another pronunciation system. And Arabic, and I don't know why. Like the Department of Defense, Department of Languages, United States. Like the United States is sort of seen as one of the. They sort of graded Chinese languages, but Mandarin, Chinese, Cantonese, they're considered level 5 or level 6. Same with Russian, Japanese, and then Arabic is up there. And I'm sitting there looking at Arabic after studying Chinese for basically 6 years, and then they also say Russian is there. I'm like, Russian isn't that difficult. The most off-putting thing about Russian is that it uses Cyrillic. But once you learn Cyrillic, you can basically read most things. I mean, it's the declensions that get people with Russian, and because there's like 27,000 declensions for nouns and verbs and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Whereas Chinese, it's like you're just memorizing emojis, and then Japanese has emojis with vowel sounds. But then you have like Arabic, which is squiggles, kind of like what Hebrew is, right? I mean, the same thing. And with Thai, it's similar to Thai, but I'm sitting there going, this is what sort of fascinates me about humanity, is that we've come up with all of these different writing systems to speak in different geographical locations. But right now, English is the universal language of everybody, or at least a lot of people. Well, and it takes me back to like people, they're saying, oh, Esperanto could be like the unifying language. I'm going, no, there's no reason to learn another language to be a unifying language. Why don't you just take the most dominant language and just encourage that one?
And it's not realistic. I mean, it isn't. Language, of course, evolves. So I've watched a couple of videos on the history of the English language. And like, say, just for example, say you or I could go into a time machine. All right, and we could go to some point in England, right? At what point could we actually somewhat communicate and people could actually understand us? And it turns out that it seems to be roughly Shakespearean times. You or I could go there and we could somewhat converse. Before then, all of the consonant changes, the vowel changes, the lexicon that they used, the word order, the grammar was so different. We might get a word here or there, or they might understand a word or there from us, but no real effective communication could go on. That's just 500 years. All right, and we're talking about English.
Idea.
Well, what I'm saying is that you can't, look, you can try to construct a language, but the point is it's always evolving. Right. And so in 200 or 300 years, you know, people who are speaking English on Mars or in another place, there could be very little that's mutually intelligible between us, even though we both speak English.
Well, but okay, yeah, but Esperanto was meant to be a standard language. Like it wasn't meant to change at all. Like so, with that whole evolution argument, it was supposed to cut that out.
And that's what I'm saying, is that it cannot work. That's why, for example, communism or socialism can't work. It needs a frozen system. It needs something to be consistent. But that's
Wow,
not
but
how
it
humans
could.
live. That's not how technology functions. People, all right, so with language, our demands are going to change. Our needs are going to change depending on the environment we're living in. Like
Right.
Eskimos have how many different words for the word snow,
I believe they're
right?
called
I
Inuit
say
now. That's what they prefer, not Eskimos.
Aleut, Eskimos, those people up north who kill baby seals and eat them. Those people.
Yeah, and
No comment, disavow, disavow. Yeah, I know.
right. Okay. So
But
with
my
that,
point,
then, in 300 years, if Elon Musk becomes our next founding father of the Martian colony, what
amen.
what will happen to the English language?
Well, whoever is there, of course, is going to evolve. I mean, did you ever see the series Firefly?
No, but I've heard lots of things about it. I don't have time to watch that much TV, man.
Well, it was only around for like 1 or 2 seasons, but it was an idea where Americans and Chinese both colonized basically the solar system. They're the first ones out and get out. But the governments can't really control it. And legitimately speaking, that's what's going to happen. All right. We might have the first colonies on Mars, but not much longer after that, they will sufficiently become their own governing bodies. The moon's something different. It's a lot closer. But what happened is they merged in terms of using English and Chinese.
Right.
And the language is going to evolve because you have different situations, you have different things, problems, concerns living on Mars than you do Earth.
Yeah, okay, I see what you
All
mean.
right.
But that's a
And
Blade
so,
Runner argument. Blade Runner did the same thing with the original series where they displayed like Japanese and Chinese characters along mixed with English. That was
but that,
and that was only 100 years in the future.
well, no, it was 2019. We've already passed Blade Runner.
Oh, okay. I thought it was
We
2099.
passed Blade Runner.
Oh, and there's
Yeah,
still
we
no
passed,
flying cars. Damn it. We were wrong again.
and Back to the Future. Hey,
Yeah, well, and Back to the Future, I don't know.
2015.
I liked Back to the Future better than I did Blade Runner, to be honest.
There,
But yeah,
you just have no taste.
in terms of that language, you are right, but it won't, because that's how it would change. It wouldn't be that the English language itself changed, that it would be more adapting. So then the question becomes, and this is a very pertinent question for nowadays, because China has been getting heat for funding the Confucius Institute overseas. So they
Mm-hmm.
give them money. I'm not sure if they're grants or if they're loans. And
Grants.
okay, so the media picks up on this and says this is Chinese propaganda. And then you look at some other councils that are set up around the world. You go, don't they get funding from those governments? American Council, some other councils that we
Well,
know of. I mean, so is that not propaganda for the English language? And
so,
where it has to be fair. If you're going to say that the Chinese funding of the Confucius Institute is propaganda, then you have to admit that the American councils set up around the world, that is propaganda for English and American culture and values.
all right, I can speak to this too because I was following it because I was I was in the first class at my university to study Chinese, and it wasn't through the Confucius Institute, but I was following what was going on with it. The issue not so much is that it was coming from Handan. All right, that's the name of the organization in China that was underwriting it. The issue was what was allowed and was not allowed in the classrooms.
Right.
All right. And this was the key point, was that if students, right, within the context, students could not talk about Taiwan, they couldn't talk about Tibet, right? They couldn't bring up things, right, and assuming that the lesson was on topic, okay? It was political history of China or something like this. But they would refuse, they would stop students from even talking about it. That was the issue.
Right.
All right. And so they would go out and they would say, no, of course, Tibet has always been a portion of China. All right. Or that the 9-dash line is an accurate representation of Chinese control of waters.
Right.
That there's nothing wrong that everything is okay in northwestern China and things like this. That was more the issue. Because I even had a coworker when I was working in Suzhou. Yao, she had actually taught at Oregon State University at the Confucius Institute while earning her master's there. And she had told me what it was like. Now, this was 2013 when she was telling me, so I guess it must have been like 2010, 2011 when she was in Oregon doing it. But she did say that there were clear things the government, the Chinese, that Handan, excuse me, I need to be clear.
The Hanban Institute.
Oh, okay, yeah. Right, not Handan, Hanban.
Yeah.
You're right. They had clear guidelines. Now, it wasn't like there was a recording device listening to her. Of course, there wasn't. But there were still clear expectations. And when you have like Northwestern University or the University of Chicago, University of Michigan, right? These are some of the highest level universities in America. Seeing that their students were being told, no, you can't talk about these things in the classroom. I'm sorry, America doesn't function that way. All right.
Okay, but with that, now, I mean, if you're employed by the American Council anywhere, any sort of American council, now you have to be a lot more inclusive of everybody and anything. I mean, so whereas one government or one people are saying, don't talk about these things, the other one's saying you have to talk about everything and you have to give everyone voice.
I understand what you're saying, but that's not an issue because unlike, say, the French, unlike the Germans, unlike the Spanish or the British, the United States doesn't have an organization dedicated to the spread of American culture, whatever that may be, around the world. It doesn't. The closest thing that we have is something called Voice of America, which is literally radio waves.
American,
it's literally radio.
Society of American. Yeah, there is.
What, the American Chamber of Commerce?
No,
the American Chamber of Commerce, that promotes business interests.
No,
they are looking. That's a far cry from what the British Council does.
There was one. I thought there was American Council for whatever, the American Society of some. But the United States, you're right. You might be right. I'm drawing blank on this one, that the United States doesn't have any direct cultural institution. But
we don't need it. Hollywood.
So then would that be it? But the United States sets up these agreements, like talking about the 9-dash line, which I'm sure the censors are picking up on now at this point. But with the 9-dash line, so they have that interpretation, but the United States comes in and says, okay, well, we're going to help you negotiate a peace offering here. Because this happens all the time in the Middle East. You're going, well, wait a minute, why is the states brokering the peace deal?
Well, the United States shouldn't be involved, but the 9-dash line didn't even start until the 1920s. It was actually started under Sun Yat-sen. You know, I never learned how to say his name in Mandarin. How do you say his name? No, but
Sun Yat-sen.
Sun
Yat-sen. Okay. I have no idea. I don't think there's any difference.
No. That's the Wade Giles system.
Oh, Sun Yat-sen. No idea. I didn't think there was a big difference. Well, it's the same thing. Mao Zedong is like, people just pronounce Z too much. It's Mao Zedong. Well, it's like an unarticulated, although it is.
You know, like Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek is Jiang Jia-shi, right? I mean, there's a huge difference with that one.
Right. Okay. So Sun Yat-sen is Sun Zhongshan. That would be.
Okay, so that's a bit different.
That's my reading of the Chinese characters, but that might even be wrong. Yeah. So I don't see another pronunciation here. Traditional.
But in terms of the 9-dash line, the United States hasn't been involved in that per se. What happened was the Vietnamese, the Filipinos, the Indonesians, the Malaysian, and the Brunei got together and complained to an authority connected to the United Nations, which the United States is not a signatory of, so it didn't get into it. But China is. And they said that the 9-dash line was a bunch of hogwash. And the Chinese had agreed to play by these rules. And then they said, oh, well, we don't like your decision, so we're going to ignore it.
Hey, it sounds like what the States does.
Yeah,
That's exactly what the United States does.
But the key part was the United States never signed the treaty, so you can't expect the United States to abide by treaties it never signed. Whereas the Chinese government did sign it, and they haven't withdrawn their signature. All right, the Chinese haven't withdrawn acceptance of it. They're just going to ignore it. There's a sorry. just to go back to your mentioning about how Canada and the United States offer citizenship, basically, if you're born there,
Yeah.
unlike almost everywhere else in the world, that basically started in the United States, but basically is adopted by everybody in the Western Hemisphere. Okay, basically all countries in North and South, well, Western Hemisphere, northern. Okay, yeah, technically Britain, Portugal, no, not even Portugal. Ireland is in the Western Hemisphere, but North and South America, almost everybody does. Pakistan does. If your son or daughter is born in Pakistan, they are Pakistani. And there's a few other countries that do that, but otherwise,
Not
North
many.
and South America aren't. Yes, just a handful.
Yeah, that's well, and that's one of the things, like one of the reasons. Well, Hong Kong does it, but I mean, Hong Kong is part of China. But one of the things that with mainland women going down to Hong Kong was so that they could get a Hong Kong passport, because Hong Kong has that British system of passport on birth. Although I'm not sure if if my wife or girlfriend ever had a child in Britain, if they would get a passport. I don't think so. I'm not sure if Britain does that. I'm not clear. Canada does. United States does. And as glorious as that sounds, it really just means it's another way for the government to tax you, which is my whole thing. It's like, there, great, another little taxpayer we can sink
certainly
our
as Americans,
teeth on.
yes.
Oh, absolutely. But with all that being said, I mean, with the whole idea of like United States doesn't get involved in these things, if there's one thing I've noticed in my travels is that whenever you see in a foreign country like a new business of some sort, it's usually either like a German or an American who's like basically become an expat. Like he's been not excommunicated, but he exiled himself, usually him, never a her, and they've set up some other business overseas. You don't see that happen. I mean, I guess you do see it happen now a little bit more and more in North America, but whenever you go to a new country and a new city, generally if you see something that looks like it doesn't belong there, in the sense that that obviously is an import of some sort, usually it's an American face behind there in some capacity, usually married to a local lady and has kids already. But it seems that it's the American entrepreneurial spirit that sort of pushes those boundaries. You don't see that from Canadians. You don't see it from the British. You don't see it from other nations as much as you do from the United States.
I think that plays into a couple of things here. So yeah, if you're worried about the censors, let's talk about genetics and inheritability. See, where I'm going with this is clearly not the slaves, obviously not black slaves, but almost everybody else chose to come here, whatever country they may have come from, all right? And they had a genetic predisposition, typically, not always, in terms of getting on a boat and doing something crazy.
I wouldn't say it's genetic now. I would say that, okay, I see where you're going with that, but I would argue that they were part of that nature of going, okay, or that environment where they're going, it's okay if you get on that boat and if you don't come back for a while. You're going on an adventure.
Well, but so, right, what's the difference between, well, there's you and me, and then there are our white cousins back in Europe. What's the difference? We're related to the ones that decided to get on the boat. That's basically the difference. And that is to some extent, people have predispositions. The idea that we are blank slates has been fairly well discredited. All right. And so you can do this. You can look at the inheritability of, generally speaking, political and economic views worldwide. All right. Generally. Hashtag not all, of course. But people have demeanors that you can follow genetically.
Well, how many brothers and sisters do you have?
How many? Yes. I have one full brother and I have four half brothers, one half sister.
In the pecking order in terms of age, which one are you? What number?
I'm number 6. So what are you going to tell me?
Okay, so
what are you going to tell me here?
So with this, and I was talking to this theory has come up a few times that generally what happens, because you're saying that we are part of this genetic disposition, and maybe to an extent that can be argued. I would doubt it a little bit, because you don't normally see the eldest of the family leaving, nor is it the second eldest. The third one might leave, but usually the people that you see that have left the country, left where they were born, it's usually numbers 4, 5, 6, you go on down the line. So the first couple usually stay pretty close to mom and dad. And I'm not saying that they're they can't detach themselves, but it's that sort of, by the time it gets to the fourth child, the fifth child, the parents are like, all right, it's still breathing, it's still living, good. There's no more expectations on the young one. Just go already. Usually the older ones are already taking care of the farm or whatever it is, the business. They have, if mom and dad pass away, the oldest knows what to do. Whereas the youngest going, let's have ice cream for breakfast. Which is actually not a bad idea. Ice cream for breakfast. It's
still it's still morning over there.
Yeah, it's 11 o'clock now. But yeah, I mean, in that sort of sense of, you're right, because I've always been very aware, thankful that not just my family, like my immediate family, my parents, that set it up that I could do something like this, sort of jump across the pond, but that I am very aware, and I realized this in South Korea, that it was like one of the reasons I can do what I do is because my grandfather left Ukraine, and he got on this boat that was basically, it was a one-way ticket, and he went to Canada. He didn't go to like France. He went to Canada. He didn't go to the States, which, I mean, he could have gone to Chicago or somewhere else, but he didn't.
Yeah.
Or like even like, I don't know, Florida would have been nice. But so we get to Canada, and we get Canadian passports, and we learn the English language. And those two things have basically taken me around the world. Now, with that, my parents also did set it up so that we could go to university and get the qualifications that would allow me to go teach English at the level that I do teach English now.
Yes.
But to be fair, 20 years ago, you did not need a master's degree to teach English. You still don't, although it is looked favorably upon if you do.
Yeah.
So yes, in that sense, there is a lineage of adventurism, of willing to take that risk that happens with some people and not all the people. But I don't know if you could say it's a genetic thing.
Well, genetic predisposition, right? I mean,
I'd want to see the research. I want to. What are your sources for this? I want to know. What do you mean?
Look, you're the one with the computer in front of him, right? And you can use.
I want to know where you're getting your sources from, because I mean, you're saying it's genetic. You're saying it's genetic, and I'm saying if it's going to be genetic, where at least does someone work? You can't just say Google. You have a computer, okay? But what link?
Look,
what website?
Do you know how many science and news articles I read a day? You know, I've been doing that
for 15
years.
Give me 2 or 3.
Look, I don't know it offhand. Is my point. I'm not an expert in genetics. I remember the point of what I've read.
And this is my point. It's like, even if I have a computer in front of me, I mean, this is like the people who say, well, just Google it. I go, well, guess what? My country, the country I live in now, first of all, doesn't allow Googling. Second of all, if I did Google it based on my IP location, it's going to be different than the searches that pop up with you. So that whole just Google it, when people say that, I discredit them as someone that I can go to for a source. So you have a choice. You have a choice of whether or not you want to be a helpful source here, or if you want to fill into that category.
It ain't going to be the
Google people.
It's not going to be during this interview anymore.
That's fine. When you can send me the links. I want to post those. I'll post those links on the website so other people can take a look at this, because this is what I'm talking about. Is like, it's easy to say these things, but then when you start reading the research, one person might read it this way and go, okay, I see what he means. But another person goes, wait a minute, this is not genetics. This is something else. So in that sense,
like I said,
what sources?
Predisposition, hashtag not all.
Not
what
all.
you were talking about earlier was also right. Of course, again, during the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, when you're looking at who was immigrating to the Americas, if it wasn't because of religious persecution, right, where, you go, it's usually the second, the third, the fourth, or the fifth child, because right? The first child and maybe the first couple of children will actually inherit either the family business or the farmland. One of the reasons a lot of people came to the Americas was because of the fact that there was only so much farmland. So you're certainly right. Okay, you're certainly right.
Oh, so you're saying it's not my ice cream for breakfast theory that the youngest was like, you can't tell me what to do. I'm going to have ice cream for breakfast. It's more like, oh, you're getting ice cream for breakfast because you're not getting the farm. So good luck.
Yeah, exactly. That because you can only divide so much land before it becomes useless.
Yeah.
So what you're talking about certainly was the reality for a lot of the people who came over.
So talking of the adventurism, because we are both products of the North American passport system that allows us to do this, you've been a lot of places. I mean, you started out in China, Harbin, right?
Yeah.
But then you've jumped around quite a bit. So what pushed you to sort of jump around to all those different places?
Well, chutzpah. And maybe, hey, your listeners are going to learn some good Yiddish.
Your fame, your reputation has remained here because you are the person who taught me not to say the word schmuck, which is something I've said my entire life, just because I thought it was a word that meant, jerk, right? But you're like, yeah, don't say that to people. I'm like, now, for people who haven't looked it up, you can look up what the word schmuck comes from.
And it is a perfectly fine word. You just need to know what it means, because if the other person knows, they might not take it very well.
Right. Well, so you're moving all around the world, right?
The reason is because even when I was going back to elementary school, my mother ordered the New York Times, and I would read and look at the international section. I was very, very good at maps, all right, and learning about history and culture of places. So I usually know something just about every country in the world, their general, probably the major faith, language, and a tiny piece or two of their history or customs. So, for example, I would be perfectly fine to go to Iran. And in fact, there is a territory within Iran called Kish Island, where actually I could go and just live there literally, because they don't have visa requirements for the United States or for most Western countries. Now, finding a job might be another thing, but I've studied and I've read and pay attention to what's going on in so many places that very few places I wouldn't go. Like I got very close to getting hired by a university in northern Iraq in 2011.
Why didn't you go?
In the end, I never got a clear answer why. I didn't get an answer as to why I was not hired. It was a little strange. I mean, it worked out in the end, all right, in that I would have liked the job, and it was a great job. It was teaching at a university, and you would have to work 2-3 month semesters. The others you had off. Mm-hmm. You got paid airplane tickets, and the salary was a flat $50,000 American a year.
Right.
And in my case, because of when I was going to be onboarded, I would have had 2 consecutive semesters. All right. So that means I would get paid $50,000 for working those 2 semesters, but I'd have the other half off to go do whatever I want before coming back.
Was that what was propelling you to go to northern Iraq, or was it some other reason?
So I was also very interested in the life there. And also, I feel this is going to sound a little strange as such, but all right. So I'm an ANCAP. I have no use for American foreign policy, and I feel very bad for what the United States government has done. And people will say, oh, well, you shouldn't feel responsible for what your government's done. No, because as a Westerner, that's a part of being a republic or a democracy. Yeah. Our tax money goes to killing those people. Yes, that is the reality. That is the reality. All right. That's what makes being Chinese at least a little bit different or better. All right. The Chinese government doesn't say, you're under no delusions about the Chinese government killing somebody in your name. All right. It doesn't happen as a Chinese citizen. And they only kill Chinese people. They don't kill foreigners. American government, you know how many tens or hundreds of thousands of Iraqis died since 1990? Not just through war, but because of the embargoes and the number of kids starving to death.
So
And Madeleine Albright
you personally feel
laughing about
responsible
it.
for this, or is it, and this sort of promoted your travels, or because I mean, this sounds like
Well,
you're getting away from the original question.
Well, okay, no, Kurdistan. Well, being specifically
Right.
there, and so I view it as a sort of penance. Like my father served in Vietnam, all right, and then I was down in Vietnam for 2 years, and for one of those years, I ran my own school, and my my second ex-wife, Vietnamese, we ran our own school. But my point is this: is that we taught a lot of students in very small classes, all right, just 6 or 7 students, but we made a lot of effort to help as many people as we could. And I don't know, we might have made over costs, right, over our living costs, maybe $100 or $200, all right. I basically had no income, right? All the money we were earning was going to our living.
Right. But Vietnam was after China, right? After Harbin.
Yes. Well, so I bounced around China from '04 to 2010, and also in the United States. I was in and out.
Right.
I went to I went to Oman in '09.
Okay, so
right.
why Oman? What happened that you went to Oman? Because I was thinking about going to Oman at some point.
Okay, so I was, like I said, in my situation, because I know what's going around different places of the world, no place really concerns me. I just look for jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I think, is this going to be an interesting job? Is this something I think I'm going to like? I have taught essentially only high school students, university students, and adults. Okay. And in Oman, there was this opportunity. It was a short-term opportunity. I was going to fill in because the teacher was getting transferred, but it was going to be teaching in a foundation program. All right, where they had to learn English before they started their major, which was also going to be in English. So it was a tiny town in Oman called Ibri. And I was thinking, okay, you know, this looks interesting. It's only 6 or 7 months. And Oman didn't have income tax. That didn't really matter so much to me, but I had Arab and Muslim friends. I was well versed in Arab history, culture, and Muslim history, and the tenets of Islam. Why not? And so I went.
What was making you actually search for this job online that you could pick Oman? Why not like Egypt?
Well, it's just the job was teaching 17, 18, 19-year-olds academic English. And that had been most of my experience in America and in China.
Right.
I worked for ELS.
Were you going through, was it through a company that you were going through, or was it through an agency that you found this?
I think it was like TEFL.com, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never found a job at Dave's ESL Cafe explicitly.
Right.
No, when I worked for Aramco, I guess it was through there. But I just find it on through the internet or Craigslist, even.
What job did you find through Craigslist that was overseas?
Well, okay. It wasn't overseas, but it was my first job after my CELTA. And that was really important because what happened was I taught in Harbin, and I used ideas that I'd understood about teaching from my own experience learning language at university or in high school.
Yeah.
Right. So I knew I wasn't a complete idiot in the classroom, and I could try to help them. But I did research. I realized, okay, I need a CELTA if I'm going to be serious about it. So I'd gone back. My mom lived in upstate New Jersey, just across from New York City. And so I took my CELTA actually in the Empire State Building.
Oh, neat.
And then my very first job afterwards. So remember, the CELTA is through the University of Cambridge, so it's British recognized.
Yeah.
And so it's 2005, the summer of 2005. And I don't get my first job until December of 2005. During that time, I've been looking to get back to China, but just a lot of things fell through. And I was going on interviews and what have you, and they weren't succeeding. And they were all over Midtown Manhattan, downtown Manhattan. And I got an opportunity for a university in New Jersey.
Right.
very close to where I live, just 5 miles. And it was through Craigslist that I found this job.
Okay.
And then that started, that was my first real job after China. And that allowed me to find another job run by a language institute on campus. And from there, if I wanted to find work, it wasn't an issue.
Right. So, I
Craigslist
mean,
was very important to me at the
when you're
beginning.
saying
And
that
finding,
when you're saying you're using the internet, there's certain websites that you go to. Like Dave's ESL is good for research, but I mean, you usually have to verify what those links are. Like you have to copy paste that school name into Google, press enter, and search and do some research on it, because sometimes it could just be like phishing for responses or for gullible noob teachers.
and to be certain, like when I taught the first time in Vietnam, RMIT, Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, have campuses both in Hanoi and in Saigon, and now in Da Nang as well. I think I found theirs through higher ed or inside higher ed or something like that. It's geared towards university level.
Right.
And I think that's also where I found it. When I worked in Suzhou, I worked for Liverpool. They have a campus in Suzhou. And similarly, I found it there. Yeah, to be certain, Dave's ESL Cafe, it's interesting in that, like you said, a lot of dodgy places, especially the Hagwons for South Korea, the language schools here in China. But it also has, on the flip side, it will carry Raytheon. That's one of the big military contractors in Saudi Arabia, right? It has Raytheon, it has RAF, I don't know who exactly that is. Aramco, which is the biggest oil company in the world, they also advertise there. And also you get really high-level Middle Eastern universities, like Sultan Qaboos, and also in the UAE.
Yeah, there's a lot of those, but even those you still have to look up, because one of the problems with Dave's ESL, I mean, it's a good place to start your search, but it shouldn't be your only place to go searching for a job overseas. And this is just for the ESL industry mostly, but yeah, with the those Middle Eastern, that's how I found. It was in Qatar and in Oman. Those are the two places I was considering before coming to China. I settled on China because it was just easier to get everything in line, basically. And it was like, and they said, yeah, if you get a CELTA, you have a job. I'm like, okay. So I did my CELTA 1 month before I came to China. I went to Montreal for it. It was fantastic, 5 weeks. But so why have you never been to like Africa? Like any part of Central Africa, South Africa, South America?
Okay, well, no, so it just, the timing was wrong, or there wasn't all right, I was directed by the job. Right. All right. It wasn't because of the people or the culture. It's just I liked the job that I had found. Now, to answer you directly, in 2015, while I was running the school in Vietnam, there was this opportunity in Peru, and it was paying all right, $2,300 a month. It was teaching university students, and in Central and South America, let's be clear here. If you can find a job that pays $1,000 a month, that's usually extraordinary.
South America is not where you go for money.
And also, if you want to get by reasonably and have some money in case you need to leave the country because you have a medical problem or whatever, you don't take a job that only pays you $500 or $1,000. You don't. No. All right. It's not. You have to go beyond just the cultural experience. You have to be an adult. You have to rely on yourself. And so I was really excited by this job. I did great at the interview. They were very enthusiastic, and then they said, "Oh, you don't have a master's degree." This was like, and this was like after the interview. It dawned on them to recheck my CV, and I'm thinking, how
did you not look?
How did you miss this fact? And they said, "Well, don't worry. If you ever get it, reapply. We'll be glad to take you." Well, thank you.
They didn't offer to give you one. Because some places will actually offer to, similar to the ESL, like if you don't have an ESL certificate, they can help you get one. Like they'll pay for it, and then you sign a contract that says you're going to be there for a while. But you're right. I mean, it's the same thing in Ukraine. When I was in Ukraine, it was like you don't see people there who are saving a lot of money. They're there usually because they are young and they just they want to go to Ukraine to see what it was like. Usually it was they want to see what the Soviet republics used to be like. But then the older teachers were basically, they had money. they didn't need the money. They did it just to cover their expenses. But if they ever needed proper health care, they had money to get a ticket out and to go wherever. Like even if it was just to Germany, they could fly out to get proper medical attention.
Exactly. And you see what, if the world doesn't go to hell in a handbasket in the next 3 to 5 years, more seriously speaking, I'll have my property set up in Fiji, and then I'd be happy to go work, teach at schools on the cheap. All right. Because I've got something set up.
So we do need to talk about that, because I think people will be fascinated to hear what your future plan is. And I introduced you as being a character, one of these characters that you meet when you travel. And so I think one of the first things that you said you were going to do when we met, there was two things. One was that you were buying gold. And I was like, the fuck, who buys gold? I mean, which is a very American thing to do in Canada. People don't talk about buying gold. It's
Jewish thing. Jewish, not American, Jewish.
Well, if it's Jewish, but there's a lot of, okay, that makes sense, because a lot of the financial guys I follow, they are of Jewish lineage, Jewish heritage. But so that was number one. Number two was like, yeah, you said that you were going to go move to Fiji. I'm like, what are you going to do in Fiji? She's like, well, I'm buying property. So for people who don't know, you have basically bought a lot of gold, and you've used this as collateral, or not collateral, but as a deposit into Fiji, that you are now applying to. Not, are you becoming a citizen of Fiji, or is it that you have? Yes. So, but you have residence, so you can buy property, which will then mean that you can build a house in Fiji.
The punchline is exactly that.
Right. So then
the order's a little bit different, but that's the punchline. Yeah.
Okay. So what is the order then? I mean, you made lots of money, bought lots of gold. Okay, gotcha.
Right. So the way that it works now, there's several different ways that you could actually get eventual citizenship in Fiji. All right. But the first thing, of course, is getting permanent residence. Mm-hmm. And so there are a couple of ways, like I said, you could do that. Now, the way that I'm looking to do it is through buying and developing my own property that I'm going to live on. Now, by law, as it currently stands in Fiji, and that may change because of the effects of the coronavirus, is you have to buy land and you have to invest at least 250,000 Fijian dollars into the property within 2 years after it's officially yours. Mm-hmm. And then you're on the road to getting a little piece of paper in your passport saying that you can stay there without getting a new visa. Then you gain permanent residency. And then after, I think it's 5 or 7 years, Mazel Tov, you're then Fijian.
So 7 years, then you become Fijian.
Right. And so what this
and it's all based on your money, basically. It's not based on your qualifications.
Well, in this case, I mean, this is not unusual. There's lots of countries all over the world, even Western European, and also, for example, the United States, where not exactly in this way, but they are investment type visas. For example, Sersky, let's say you wanted to become American, all right? So if you, just as an example, all right? So if you had $500,000 to play around with and you started a small business that employed at least 10 Americans for like 2 or 3 years, congratulations. You've just won yourself a green card. And now you can live and work. And now you can live and work anywhere in America. Right. Yep. You can live anywhere. You can work for anybody you like. You don't need to do any more paperwork for that part anyway with immigration services. I don't know after how many more years. I think it's just like 2. You can, I think it's, right, you get your green card. And then after 5 years with your green card, you can apply for citizenship, I think.
So where do those 10 people have to be? Can they be in like the Philippines or Pakistan?
They have to be at least American. They have to be permanent residents of the United States. Oh, I don't think they have to be citizens, but they have to at least be legal residents. So you can't own a farm and bring in some Mexicans to do it.
No. In terms of, I'm not trying to be schmimy about this. What I'm saying is that, like, if you, in terms of immigrating to the United States, if someone wanted to do that, they could hire 10 of their friends in the Philippines or whatever, and then say, yes, I have a company, I have $500,000, and I have 10 employees. Now I apply for this in the United States, right? Now, the complication to this, and I'm sure they haven't solved this problem yet, you said permanent residence. If
Right.
I find 10 backpackers online who do, I don't know, video editing, copy editing for me, they're all permanent residents, but they're not based in the United States anymore. I make $500,000. Does that mean I can still move to the States?
So so your company, you had invested $500,000.
Yes.
I guess your company could even not succeed. I guess in the end you could declare bankruptcy, but at least for those first 2 years you don't.
Right.
I don't know what type of paperwork there is to establish whether they even have an office. I mean, you bring up a good point. I mean, when I was looking into this was more than a decade ago. I imagine.
Oh, things have changed.
Actually, I don't know. Well, look, just because our reality has changed doesn't mean that INS has followed up on this. They have other fish to fry. I don't know.
Because I sort of think of like, why would someone want to move to the States? And this has been a question that, up until, and I don't blame Trump necessarily for this. I sort of blame the whole media circus that's going on, is that up until recently, I've always sort of seen the United States as a viable place to live. Like, even for me, like I wouldn't say no to living there, but one of the reasons I've never been there to live is because of the financial and the qualifications. Like, my qualifications suit for being in a non-English country, and my desire to travel and see the world as it is doesn't lend itself to being in one place, such as the United States, which is very similar to Canada. So it doesn't make sense in that regard. But if I was someone else looking to immigrate to the United States, what would the avenues be? And you're saying that business would be one of them. I mean, marriage is another one, obviously, but that's a different argument. But setting up a business and doing that sort of thing. But so getting back to moving to Fiji and the whole reason, that why didn't you choose? Oh, and by the way, the Fijian dollar to the United States dollar is 47 cents today. So you needed $500,000 Fijian dollars.
So about 120,000 American right now.
So 120,000 American. That's not
about.
It says 234,610 US dollars. Which, yeah, so in Canadian dollars, it's probably like 7 billion, whatever, because this Canadian dollar drops again. Okay, so 234,000 American dollars, right? So you buy citizenship.
Yeah, 120,000, yeah.
And you have to deposit that into the account, or how does that work?
So what will happen is I'll buy the piece of property, and that process takes apparently it takes 4 or 5 months.
Mm-hmm.
All right. They have to make sure there's not a lien on the property or this or that. But then after that point, I don't have to make a deposit. But what I do have to do is I have to show through receipts that I have spent 120,000, the 250,000 Fijian dollars into it. Right. And so that would be things from the construction company. That would be things that are installed into the house.
Right.
The people who flatten the land, or people I hire to put up fences or a greenhouse or whatever. And all of that all together must equal at least 250,000 Fijian dollars over the course of the 2 years. And if I'm not able to do it, let's say, for example, I'm only able to do 200,000 by the end of that. Then what happens is I am fined 10% of that remaining 50. Well, hang on. No. I'm fined 10% of that remaining 50,000, not the whole thing, just the part I'm short, but every 6 months.
So you have to get it done, basically, if you don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, reasonably, you might say you plan on doing it over the 2.5 years, maybe, but you just make sure you get really close to that 250,000 as you can. So you'll only pay that 10% penalty once.
So what, is there an out clause? Like, can you say, you know what, it's not going to happen?
You could do is before the expiry, you try to find a buyer of the property. And in their case, they would have 2 full years from whenever the paperwork was finished. So it's not as bad as it sounds, right? It's not like they'd have a very short amount of time to do it. all right, they get a new clock. All
Right.
right, so that part's taken care of.
Sorry, you cut out there. Can you, what was that again? They get the clause, and then what happens?
Right, so what happens is, let's say they were to buy it from you, right? You aren't going to make it.
Right.
But they buy it, then that means the clock starts again. All right,
Oh,
the
okay.
paperwork will still take
Okay.
4 or 5 months, and then they get 2 years. So it's not like you're finding someone who's going to agree to take this on, and they've got just a handful of months to do it. But what is interesting is they still have to put in 250,000 Fijian dollars. So you've
Oh,
already
wow.
built something on the property. So then it gets to be, well, okay, what are you also, are they just going to tear down what you put up?
Oh, they make it
And
into
build
a
something
mansion or
else?
something. Does this happen a lot, or is it one of these things that, it's, given the price, not many people do it?
Well, so I've spoken to one real estate agent I've been in contact with for more than a year about it.
Mm-hmm.
And what he tells me is that the reason that Fiji even did all of this about 5 or 6 years ago was because a lot of people got rich after the last really large economic recession back in 08.
Mm-hmm.
They bought a lot of land, but then they weren't doing anything with it.
Oh, okay.
Right, they'd hold on to it 5, 10 years and then eventually just sell it because it was so cheap anyway. Right, like an acre is only 10,000 American dollars.
Is that a
All right,
lot?
and it's really not a lot at all. And where I'm looking, it's good farmland.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and so anyway, that's why the Fijian government changed the system and put in this penalty system with it.
That you have to develop the land. You can't just
That
let
you
it
have,
sit.
right? You got, yeah. You
So is
got to do
this
something.
screwing over the Fijians at all? How is this hurting the local population?
Okay, so Fiji has more than 330 some islands. Where I'm looking to live is one of the tertiary islands, and it has fewer than 10,000 people on it. And so as for the local or native people, when I say local or native, that's more like how they live. Now, to be certain, there are medical clinics on the island, and there's even a proper hospital, but they have their own school. And in terms of their living lifestyle, it is much, much more like the natives of a long time ago. It's not like the American Indian reservations in the United States or the comparable of the First Nations in Canada. All right, that's the lifestyle they want to live. They are aware of how they are living,
Right.
and that's the island I'm living on. So or wish to live on. So what I'm saying, it pertains more to this specific island and the situation there, and on other smaller islands. On the 2 main islands, especially the main island, Fiji has right now roughly almost 1 million people, and something like 800 or 850,000 people live on that main island.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that was one of the reasons, was that the property on that island was so expensive that, as you said, it was screwing over the local population, wasn't making it really possible. And so they have also by now heavily regulated who can control what type of land. There are 3 different types of property in Fiji. I can't go into the details that much about all of them. Well, 2 of them I cannot. The one that I'm interested in is called freehold. Fiji was a former British colony, and they follow British common law. With freehold land, that means I can buy it and I can give it on to my heirs.
Okay.
And Fiji has no property tax. Hey, I'm sold.
So that's why you're doing this for the property taxes? That's the reason?
Well, you didn't ask me why I even thought about doing something like this at the beginning.
Well, that was we were getting there. Why Fiji?
Well, no. See, I originally had this plan back in 2011. And for those at home not paying attention, we are recording this 2020. I originally thought about doing this, but it was the Azores, which is in the Atlantic.
Yes.
All right. It wasn't until 2017 that I found out about Fiji. See, the Azores have good agricultural land. And there's a very tiny island in the far northwest of the Azores. I can't remember the name of the island offhand right now, but it was also very isolated, good farmland, lots of rain year round, fairly temperate weather, variety of food can be grown, happy to be there.
Right.
Territory of Portugal. So anyway, I find out that Fiji, most of the South Pacific islands are literally desert islands. You cannot grow food there. Fiji, you can. All right.
Okay.
Not only that, Fiji is sufficiently the breadbasket of the South Pacific for what it's worth.
Right. So just to
And so-
clarify, for people who can't geographically locate Fiji, it is northeast off of Australia, a few hundred miles. It's sort of it's part of the like East Timor, not East Timor, the other one. Is it Vanuatu? Like it's
Well, the
near
easiest
that.
way to find it, is to find the North Island of New Zealand and then just go directly
Go
north.
straight up. That's where it is.
Yeah, just go straight north. That's the easiest way to find Fiji.
Right. So it's out in the South Pacific, which is what us Northerners say. It's South Pacific, and Australia is kind of like, it's water. It's Pacific.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, what was the impetus? I mean, so 2017, you found out a little bit more.
Like I mentioned earlier, I read articles about science, business, I read stuff every day. And so I hadn't known that Fiji was like this. And then I knew that Fiji was British common law. And I started checking all of these things. And it was a lot better than becoming Portuguese. That was another point. Becoming Portuguese and doing that was going to cost me at least 300,000 euros to do.
Okay, so it's
and that was going to take me a lot longer, right? I was thinking, okay, it's going to be 2030 by the time I'm able to do this. I'm going to be 50, almost 50 years old. I'll deal with it, but I'll do it. Fiji, you know, depending on how much gold and silver, at the rate at which gold and silver goes up, and assuming Fiji doesn't change its laws, I may already have enough. I mean, as it stands with gold and silver prices as of this week, basically, I've roughly $70,000 in precious metals.
Wow.
But we're looking at, because of how much money the Fed is printing, it could easily, if it doubles, all right. And I've seen reasonable forecasts saying that over the next 5 years, gold itself could triple or quadruple. I'm not counting on it. Okay, don't get me wrong. I'm not counting on it, but it may already be there. And silver, the ratio of gold to silver historically is roughly 25 to 1 or 35 to 1, right? 25 to 35 pieces of silver to 1 piece of gold. Right now, it's about 80 to 1. It is really out of whack.
So it's going to come down.
Well, gold will come down relative to silver, but right? If gold doubles or triples, silver ought to quintuple or septuple, right? Go up 6 times, maybe 7 times.
Okay.
I just need patience. Well, patience I got. All right. I can wait a few years if this means I can get it done.
Right. So in terms of that, if Fiji, because all the farming, why not some place like St. Kitts and Nevis?
All right. So what I like about Fiji is that I don't need to worry about hurricanes. Not nearly as much. Seriously. Okay. No, that you address a very important point here.
Yes.
Typhoons occasionally do go. That is a concern. So typhoons do occasionally go through the South Pacific, and Fiji has certainly been hit before. Now, what I'd like to say is not nearly as often as with the hurricanes, but also the property I'm looking for or looking to acquire ain't beachfront property. And not only that, I do my homework. And also being an American, you know, we like to build bomb shelters.
So you're going to build a bomb shelter, aren't you?
Well, not exactly a bomb shelter, but you know, right? I lived in Tornado Alley, didn't you? Right?
Not me, no.
Because it extends into Canada. You were too far west?
Oh, Manitoba gets like a tornado once every now and then, and everyone's like, oh my God, look, there's a tornado. Oh, remember, stop taking pictures and get out of the way because they are actually kind of dangerous. That's the area. It's not like, okay, there's another tornado. No, it doesn't happen very often.
Okay, so, right, it requires a deeper ground cellar, basically, that's waterproof, because you just need to let the storm blow by, all right? That's all it really is, and that's not too difficult to construct, right? That's not going to cost me much money. Frankly, I'm worried I'm not going to think of enough things to make it 250,000 Fijian dollars. I'm going to have to waste money trying to make it more grandiose than what I want. Well, and so, maybe
you need like a little a little bunker so you can go out there and watch the storm go by? Like that'd be kind of neat where you're able to actually walk up the stairs. You had your coffee, go, yeah, world's going to shit. My bomb shelter's still here. Oh, there goes a cow. Yeah, no problem. Storm's over. Back outside we go.
Look, the Fijians on the island where I'm going to be living might not have that much technology. They ain't stupid. It's going to be underground. If they see this little bubble above so that I can watch the storm go by, you know who they're going to visit? They're going to visit me when the storm comes.
Well, so you're not going to be very neighborly, is what you're saying? Is that you're
look? I'm happy
there goes
to
the
be
neighbor's house. Good, more land for sale.
I'm happy to be neighborly. I just won't have a place for 5,000 people. These are two different things.
Right. And what's the connection like to Australia and to New Zealand from Fiji? Like if it was necessary to get out?
So actually Nadi is the name of the major international airport in Fiji. They have two. Now, Nadi is not in the capital. The capital is Suva and has a much smaller airport. Actually, they have, when it's not the coronavirus times, they have direct flights to Hawaii, Los Angeles, Singapore, China, not seasonal, ongoing, Japan. They used to have it to Hong Kong, certainly a couple of cities down Australia, Sydney, Adelaide, Melbourne, Christchurch, Wellington in New Zealand.
Right. I mean, you just need to get to Australia basically if you needed more like first world healthcare. But I mean, it sounds like if they have that type of international connection, they probably have an international hospital there too that could take care of it.
There's not much difference in terms of time between Australia and Hawaii, because from Fiji up to the northeast is Hawaii.
Right. So you don't have to worry about jet lag and all that crap. And like, is it going to be open?
Now, for the people who is listening who are rational, you're probably going to stay on the main island. Like I said, I'm going to be on a tertiary island. Well, the meaning is this, right? If I need medical care, look, it's going to take me some time just to go from the island I'm on to the main island.
Right. That was actually my next question.
That's what I was going to say.
Are you going to be flying or boating, or how would that work?
Well, so when I decided I was going to do all of this, I also decided I was going to learn to become an EMT, a basic paramedic. And I was also going to learn how to fly an airplane. Now, as you know, I got my EMT training a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm still going to learn how to fly an airplane.
That's cool. That's pretty cool. I want to do that too.
It's not expensive. All right. As of right now, you can probably find, especially if you do an accelerated course, because the real problem is gas, and then fees for your teacher who has to be in the airplane with you.
Right.
All right. But even now, right, if you can do compressed like in a month, then you could probably do it for 10, 11,000 American dollars. Gas is really cheap right now. It's only about $40 a barrel. So now is actually a good time.
Where would someone do that?
Oh, you're going to love me again. Will you just trust me when I tell you you can Google this? There's a whole bunch of aviation schools all across the United States, Australia. I'd figure it'd have to be true in Canada too. But what I did is there are a few websites, I can't think of their names right now, that do some comparison for you. But basically, I just started looking at airports. I found lists of airports or schools that would do condensed courses.
Right.
Right. If you're good enough a pilot, you're not stupid, and you have the time and dedication that you can do it in a month, right? I was specifically looking for those type of programs, and I just did comparison shopping. But usually I found it between 10 and 15,000.
What if someone's not a good pilot because they've never flown an airplane before?
Well, no. I mean, in that you're not stupid, that you're paying attention in your classes. Now, what I've also learned is, so Microsoft actually makes a great program called Flight Simulator.
That's only available on Windows, not on Mac.
Well, it's Microsoft. Yeah, I know Microsoft can now go on Mac, some of it, not all.
Okay, so do you have a solution for us Mac users? Because I can tell you there isn't one. I was looking at it. Just last week, I Googled it, as you said, and I was looking to actually practice my drone flying, and DJI has only recently, as I found out, stopped the flight simulator for Mac systems. So you can do it on Windows, but you can't do it on Macs.
So contact Tim Cook, who is currently running Apple, and tell him Okay.
Anyway,
Well,
so but in terms of like these 1 month things, like because I did Google this years ago, and
mhm.
I'm asking you because like, do you have a place in mind or is it a location? Like I was
Okay.
going to go to
So,
Los Angeles because it was like $600 per week that you could rent like an airplane and get someone to train you basically. But you're looking to go through classroom study and everything. What are you
because you
looking
have to.
for? What are you looking
Well,
for in terms of your training?
all right. Well, I mean, what is mandatory for the license itself? And so there's a battery of tests you're going to need to take, right? There is in classroom teaching, and then there's the flying time.
Hmm.
And what I'm looking for when I'm trying to find schools, I'm looking for schools that very explicitly state what all of their charges are or how they do the charging, right? That was going to be what Flight Simulator can really help. I mean, if you get really good at Flight Simulator, you need something like it's expected. It's expected that you need somewhere between 40 and 50 hours of flight time for you to be able to show that you can do all of these certain things that you must be able to do so that you can be issued the license, right? So that
Right.
the person, the pilot teacher can check them off and say, okay, I will take responsibility saying this person's competent to fly,
Hmm.
right? You have to agree upon that because if they don't, you're going to have to find somebody else to do it. And so, but what I've read and understand is that if you become very good at Flight Simulator, use on the plane that you're going to be flying or intend to fly, you can reduce it by 10 hours. Now, okay, you're going to say, well, that doesn't sound like a lot. If you think about how much it costs for the
Right.
fuel, and then how much it costs just for the teacher to sit in the airplane next to you, it's more than worth the investment. But that's why I'm saying you get an approximate for how much it's going to cost because fuel prices can go up or down depending on what's going on.
Right, but you're
But
saying so $10,000 is ballpark figure right now,
right, right. But
as we
that's
sort of
all of
speak.
tuition. That should cover everything. All right.
Right.
The tuition for your written exam, that should cover your instructor fees, and that should include the fees for using the airplane and then also for the jet fuel and any other associated chemicals you need for the maintenance or the usage of the aircraft.
Now, is that in the United States or is that in Australia? Is that another?
So I found one or two places like that. I found one I know in Wichita,
Okay,
in
so it's
Kansas.
United
I
States.
also saw, well, I chose Wichita. I was looking for places that, again, was doing the short course, the fast course. And then I looked at Wichita because I have a friend who lives there who I could stay with. Ventura County, which is just north of LA, has one. Well, that's where I was living when I was doing the research.
Right.
But those were the ones I specifically remember. This was a year ago
Right.
or a year or 2 years ago.
So
But there
my
was going to be
question
more,
would be that if you are going to go live in the South Pacific, why
right?
wouldn't you go take a course in Australia or New Zealand that would teach you how to fly in an area that you would be flying?
Well, the theory and the practice is not going to be all that much different where it is,
But the conditions will be.
and also not so much. I mean, the South Pacific is going to be sufficiently different from continental Australia. Maybe not New Zealand, excuse me, but continental Australia is going to more resemble the United States. But in terms of that, a license from the United States allows me a greater variety of places to be able to fly.
Right.
It got really tricky trying to figure out because here the websites are a bit opaque about recognizing licenses from other countries.
I don't
What
think
I
it's
was
opaque.
able,
I think they basically say, we don't trust you. You have to be certified by the
no, no,
FAA.
well, no. See, that's the thing is that a lot of them don't accept the FAA. That's the thing. They don't accept American licenses.
The
Fiji
other
does.
countries, but the United
Yes.
States says you have to train to our standards, not
Oh,
to your
well,
country style.
right. But the thing is that essentially everybody else follows American lead when it comes to
Okay,
this.
right. Yeah, because
Um,
the Australia still has its own training program for
of
their own
course.
pilots and whatnot. Same with
Oh,
and
certainly.
China is doing that as well. They have their own training program. But one of the reasons I was looking into getting trained in the United States was because a lot of people do uh, go by the FAA standards, and that if you want to do more drone piloting, like for commercial or for agricultural purposes, that you would be certified. But not just that. If you got certified by the FAA, then you would know the theory, you'd have the tests, you'd have the general idea of how an airplane works. But then you could go to these other places and it becomes more of a language barrier, which then you could get a translator or whatever. But then you could go get certified in other locations as well, and then add to your qualifications rather than.
Right.
So it's not a bad thing getting certified in Los Angeles. But I'm saying,
Right.
what you're going to go to the South Pacific. Wouldn't it make more sense to fly down to Australia and learn how airplanes react to the conditions of the South Pacific?
But like I said, there's not going to be so much difference. And especially, right, if you're talking about specifically like that, then even, all right, so Wichita might not, well, to an extent, even Wichita might resemble it, because Kansas still gets hit by the after effects of a hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, say what you will about Australia being very close to Fiji, you almost never hear about a typhoon or tropical storm hitting mainland Australia.
Never. Forest fires, that's it.
So, I mean, to the extent that the weather is similar, Wichita may bear some resemblance more. And then Ventura is right. You've heard of Ventura Beach, I would think. It's okay.
It might have popped up when I was looking at flight schools, because there's a lot in Los Angeles, but yeah, it wasn't really. Los Angeles has everything, though. I mean, you fly there, you can do anything in Los Angeles, basically. It's one of the great things about Los Angeles. So then what's your timeline for Fiji? You said it's like 5 or 6 years, or what's the deal?
So the trick, there are two things that are going on right now. The coronavirus really screwed things up in that I wasn't earning our princely income, shall I say.
Right, so you're unemployed like the rest of us, basically, yeah.
Right, but it really depends on how gold and silver react.
Okay.
I mean, that's it. That's really it. I mean, I'm happy to earn the other 70,000 if that is what it takes.
Right.
And I'm not going to sit around. But right now, it's okay. So it's the middle of October, and so the coronavirus. There's still issues. Winter is coming in the northern hemisphere. It's going up again tremendously. It's in fact higher now. The coronavirus is higher in a lot of European countries now than it was back in March.
Yeah.
It isn't that way yet in America, but it looks like it's going to go there. I'm going to Korea at the end of the month, but it looks like the northern hemisphere is going to shut down again. So I'm going to just have to find a place to bunker down for a while. So if gold and silver react, unfortunately, right? If gold and silver does the best thing for me, that means the American economy and the world economy has basically gone down the tubes. All right, to be honest. No, that's what it means. It is. It's an economic collapse. But if that happens, then it could be like anywhere from a year from now to 3 years from now. If that doesn't happen, and I'm having to earn my own money, well, I'm a good Jew. I can squeeze money out of a rock.
I want to see that happen.
I listened to your interview with our coworkers. I listened to both of them.
Okay.
And so you were talking about how you wanted a whole apartment to yourself. You want a place to rest, relax, reasonable, right? I was paying 1,600 RMB a month for my space, which is just, it's not, let me think, it's not even $250 American dollars by the exchange rate.
Yeah, for Canadians, that's about 350 divided by 5.2. Basically, you get about $350. Yeah, no, and I do know people. You're one of them, but there's people who they share apartments, like they rent a room. But I just couldn't do it. I was like, no, I'm child number 4. I've shared rooms my entire life. I'm done with that. No way. I'm getting my own apartment, even if it costs me money. If I can't pay rent, guess what? I find a different job. I mean, that's what it was going to be. I mean, it wasn't going to be, I'm going to lower my living standards, which sounds, entitled or whatever it is. But I go, you know what? No, I've traveled so many places. I go, if I can sustain this lifestyle for a little bit longer, I'm going to give it a go. I mean, China has basically gotten back to normal now. So we're working, everyone's working, English teachers are working and everything.
Yeah.
You said you're going to South Korea. What are you going to be doing in South Korea?
So the reason I'm headed to South Korea is first, so I have a son and he is half Chinese. He's 10 years old. He lives in 11 years old. He lives in Qinhuangdao. He's going to elementary school there. My future, no matter how you cut it, is not in America. But to be direct, I am fleeing. All right, I will be direct here. No, this is, all right, 2 points. First, there is political violence going on here in the United States. Already, 2 Trump supporters have been literally murdered on the streets. One in Oregon, one in Denver in the last month and a half. And the media, which is fairly leftist, not liberal, there's a big difference, but leftist, have basically dismissed both. It has gotten very little time. And the fact that the Democratic Party in the United States has refused to denounce Antifa, they've just refused to acknowledge it. Nancy Pelosi, who is the Speaker of the House, didn't even talk about there being violence until August. 35 Americans had already died during the rioting.
So
Sorry.
going to South Korea is because
so
Pelosi
the
won't
political
acknowledge
violence, because the
Antifa?
elections, no, because of this political violence and the zeitgeist that is right now in the United States. Already one third of people who identify on the left and 1/3 of those who identify on the right believe that violence can be justified to meet political ends. It was only 10%. It was only 8% just 2 years ago.
Right. So getting back to all that craziness, but when you move to South Korea, you're American, passport holder, white. Do you think they're going to accept you or they're going to say, no, get out of here? I mean, go back to your place.
So this was the first part. The second part was, I've been following all this time, where can Americans or other nationalities go now during the coronavirus? And actually, there's still quite a few countries that are open. Now, the reason I chose South Korea, when the coronavirus problem started, there were 3 countries that did exceptionally well, all right, and basically didn't lock down. South Korea, Japan, and not a country, a renegade province, Taiwan. Right? Yes. These 3 territories did extremely well. Now, as an American, I can still, even with all the nonsense that's going on, I can still go to South Korea for 3 months without a visa. Great. So that was one of the big things for me. But then also, it was one of these 3 that I found to be good, all right, in terms of how their governments handled it. Very non-authoritarian, which leads to the second point. The states, a lot of the governors have been doing many unconstitutional things, and the judges have even ruled that, and some of the governments have continued to ignore it, especially, for example, the governor in Michigan. She said, I don't care about the decision, I'll just do it another way that does the same thing. She literally said that. And then the Attorney General of Michigan said, well, we aren't going to enforce it. We're not going to prosecute. But this is getting to be crazy.
So you're leaving the United States because it's crazy, and South Korea is not crazy.
Right. And so what I'm going to do is, and then, so I can go to South Korea, and I've been looking to get specifically to Japan, but either are fine, because in a time of crisis, Orientals, East Asian people don't usually go crazy. Okay. They don't. No, seriously, consider the nuclear. Look at how the Japanese handled their disasters dealing with Fukushima and earthquakes. Compare that to what would happen in America. Can you just imagine how it would play out? Right? And I mean this in all sincerity. I've studied Eastern culture, as have you. All right? They don't get crazy, they don't panic.
They also have a media that's not as free and capitalist as the United States.
Well, the Japanese do. Okay, the Japanese do. Maybe not the Koreans. I can't talk about Korea, but the Japanese do. But anyway, right now, it's very difficult to get a work visa. That's why I didn't apply for a work visa. It's very difficult to get a work visa.
So you're going on a tourist visa to South Korea. Are you going to be working there? Like, is that the job? That the idea? You're finding a job, or you have a job lined up?
No. Because the Korean, it's almost impossible right now to get a work visa for Korea or Japan. Almost impossible. But it's not impossible to get a student visa. Okay. Now you're saying, okay, but why all of this right now? Well, the elections are in 2 weeks, okay? Just over 2 weeks. So I don't have a lot of time. So I can't wait around in America to set it up. And I didn't even know this was an opportunity until 2 weeks ago. All right, I didn't know until the beginning of October that I could go to South Korea and actually play this out.
Right.
So I've been in the process of handling my business here in America and making sure when I get to Korea that they don't put me on an airplane headed back. And they won't. They're going to put me in quarantine for 2 weeks, but then I've got 10 weeks, basically, to figure out what I'm going to do. Either
Right.
apply to a Korean language school and then get a temporary student visa, or go for Japan, or do both.
Yeah, may as
Right?
well.
I'm waiting for the coronavirus problem just to play out so
Yeah.
that I can get back to working or figure out what I'm going to do next.
Are there any jobs in the States that you could do?
Well, okay, assuming that I genuinely believed that things weren't going to turn ugly, all right? Assuming that, and assuming that I didn't think that they were going to shut down schools and universities, remember?
Right.
Right? Assuming these two things were true. I could, but not, but the base is I don't want to live in America anyway. Could I find work? Yes.
What could you
Generally, I
do?
don't.
Okay, so if
Well,
you could
as an
find work,
ESL
what
instructor,
is it?
so my complication still rises from the fact that I'm overqualified, but I'm undereducated for most of the jobs that I could consider. Community colleges or things like that. I taught for Liverpool University. I
Right.
taught for Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. These are fairly good universities, but I didn't have a master's degree. You know, some rinky-dink community college requires a master's.
So would you think about getting a master's in South Korea? Because that's what a lot of the English teachers did when I showed up there. They were all like, oh, we now need master's degrees to do this job, even though you don't need a master's degree to teach English, teach ESL.
So what happened was back in 2008, 2009, I was looking to do a master's in applied linguistics or in TESOL online.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked up who was the best, who had the best online programs. And I saw that Macquarie University down in Australia had one. And so what happened was I applied, I was accepted, and I completed my first, it's a 2-term program, right? Just 2 semesters. Now, to be clear, I wasn't going to be writing a thesis, all right? I don't have the focus to write a thesis. And I don't really care for, and see, this was the problem. I didn't really care for language or linguistics. I care about my execution and how well I'm able to facilitate my students' learning.
Right.
That is my primary concern. I don't care who came up with what theory. I don't care about those names. I care
in those degrees, like in the linguistics, you study a lot of like theories behind language acquisition, and you're going, how does this help me entertain a bunch of kids who just want to throw spitballs at each other?
Exactly. And so I was doing the master's for the wrong reason. I was doing it so that I could get a paycheck. That's exactly the wrong reason, to be honest, to be intellectually honest. You're doing it just so you can get a higher job. It's unfortunate. Okay, if you have to do it, fine. But what happened during that time was I started going through my divorce with my first wife.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I didn't do the second term.
Okay.
And then basically life happened because I still have to pay another 10,000 American dollars. And now the exchange rate's gone up and down and tuition fees have gone up since then. But then life got in the way. You know, I had to move on, right? I couldn't see my son that much anymore. Lots of things happened.
So it's interesting that you've come to this point that you say you're basically fleeing, you're taking off. Yeah, you're leaving the United States because you're unhappy with how things are going there, which you do hear from American expats a lot. But then at the beginning, you said that you're an American patriot. I mean, is there a difference here? What is the difference?
Sorry, Steve, that whole part there just cut off. I have no idea what you said.
Amazing it happened at that point.
You said the last thing you said is that a lot of American expats you meet, they have similar inclinations, similar feelings, and then
that they're fleeing. Okay, and then but at the beginning you said that you are an American patriot. So
Sure.
How can an American patriot flee his country?
Well, that is easy because the people of the country no longer care for the principles upon which it was founded. And they would rather trade away those principles for some idea of comfort than to live to those principles. See, one of the problems with freedom is that you have to take the responsibility for that freedom. And most people, in my experience, it doesn't matter where they live, don't want to take it. They'd rather be told what to do. They'd rather live in some confines and feel some level of security than independence. And I'm not saying that this is new. This has gone on for a very long time in the United States. It's not a Republican versus Democrat, left versus right. It's just the general feeling of the people in this country is general. And they make up the majority. Who am I, right? I'm an anarchist as it is, but I don't want to force my belief on others.
Right.
All right. But
We
I
should
also don't want
also
them
bring up the fact that one of the reasons why you're fleeing is that you survived a gun attack.
well,
Which
okay,
you said,
well,
actually, you said that to me. I'm like, oh, well, maybe we could market it that way. And you're like, that's not true. And okay. So what actually happened is that you got threatened to be shot or to have someone
right.
shoot you. So what
Yes.
happened? What was the situation? And like, I mean, in terms of like, why were you getting threatened with a gun?
Well, okay, and that goes back to that zeitgeist and that feeling that I was telling you about. The fact that the Democrats would not call out political violence. And so
Right.
there are a lot of people who are scared of Antifa because Antifa is going around beating up people, burning down buildings, more than $3 billion worth of damage. So what happened with me? So in the United States, when you're running for office, you're limited in how much money you can receive in terms of donations to help people advertise for you or what have you. Now you can put in as much money as you personally want, but in terms of getting donations, people are capped at some level. Different levels of government, different amounts, state regulations, local, what have you. Point is, there are groups, not-for-profit groups called PACs, political action committees, which are formed to try to help raise money in general, not specifically for you, perhaps, though some might be, but more in general for maybe just people who have this who are against abortion or for this or that, something like this, right? Generalizations. So anyway, there is one of these organizations, I'm not going to say which, but which is more conservative, but American libertarian aligned. And they were looking at doing state elections, all right, local elections, local state representative, local state senator, all right? Not Washington, D.C., your state capital, like Topeka or Albany. And so anyway, they were looking for people to go door to door and just let them know about the local candidates. And that's what I did. All right. And that's what I did. And so
knock, knock, knock. Get off my property. I'm going to shoot you because this is America. I have a gun. I'm allowed to shoot people if I want to shoot them.
Well, that's not exactly what happened. So what I will say is that, unfortunately, well, I was up in New England, and I'd never been to New England before. And it was very nice, okay? It's the end of September. It's very nice. Never been there before. And the people in general were very nice, except for the couple who really didn't like me. And so anyway, it was the second day of me going door to door. Now, this was really rural. Yeah. And so to give you an idea, in the morning, I had knocked on one person's door. All right. First, I had to walk down their driveway, which took me 20 minutes, which means it had to have been more than a mile long. Okay. It took me just 20 minutes walk, right? It's farmland. It took me 20 minutes to get to their house. Nobody home. Right. I come back. It took me an hour just to visit 2 houses. All right. Now, usually it wasn't that bad. Okay.
Yeah. Usually you're supposed to have a car that can drive you to these places.
Well, we do believe in protecting the environment to some extent. Okay. Anyway, be that as it may, in this case with this particular household, it was almost dusk, to be fair. And so when I get to the driveway, I'm looking up, and now it's shrouded by trees on both sides. It's about 5:15 in the evening. And so it's starting to get a little bit dark. And so as I'm heading up the driveway, it's uphill. Over to the left, I see the house. And then over to the right, I hear sounds and I see what must be construction going on. All right. It looks like a barn. And so what I figure is, okay, I'm not going to waste my time. They're probably watching it. They don't want to hear this. And if I speak to them about it, it might even put them off from voting for the guy. Right. So I decide, okay, I'm just going to mark it as they weren't home. So someone else later, right, there will be another cycle later, can come in and speak to them if it's a reasonable time. So anyway, I start heading down the hill, and then I hear a voice, and it sounds like they're calling out to me. So I turn my head, I turn my body, and I see a woman. Now, she's over by the house, and she's I don't know, 10, 15 yards away at least. And she asked me who I am and what I'm doing. And I explain who I am. I give her my name. I mentioned the name of the candidate, what they're doing. I mentioned that's already your incumbent, right? It's already your incumbent. And she said, I have no idea who that is. And what are you doing on our property? And I explained what I was doing. I said, but I'm leaving. I'm going. I understand. And I just immediately turn around and I just keep walking, right? So I get to the end of the driveway and I'm about to just cross the road, okay? I'm just about to cross the road to go to the next house. And what I see coming from my left is a truck, a red pickup truck. And I stopped.
Oh,
And so, no, this part's okay. They stopped, they motioned me to move. And I just indicate I'm about to cross the street. So they turn up the driveway. All right, they turn up the driveway. I start crossing the street. So by now I'm on public road. Okay, I'm on public road. And then I hear a voice that says, you better get out of here, from behind me. And I turn around and I see this white gentleman in a cut tank top, and he had tattoos on his arms and a red baseball cap. Anyway, I briefly tried to explain to him what I am doing and that I'm going to the next house. And he says that first, I'm not going to continue down the street because I still have to continue down the street to a few other houses. He said, you're not going to go down that way. You're not going to go over there. You're on camera. And if you don't get going, I'm going to shoot you. Okay. Now, I'm not panicked. All right. I've been in
Jeez.
bad situations before, not like this, but I remain calm. You know,
Right.
Remain calm now, cry or get panicked later. Good idea. So I have a clipboard even in my hand. Okay, I have a clipboard with a piece of paper with, material on it in my hand. I don't argue with them. I just turn the direction I had come from and I just slowly start walking. Don't make any fast move towards my pockets, right? I have a jacket on. I just have my clipboard right there against me and I just walk. And as I'm walking at a slow, steady pace, I hear him call out to me and say something. So I turn to him and I say, I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said. And he yells something at me and I still don't understand him. Now, by this point, he hadn't moved from where he originally was. And I had already gone down like maybe 10 yards maybe. And so he yelled at me and he moved aggressively. He didn't run, okay? He didn't run or anything like that. I figured, okay, he doesn't really care to make sure I understand what he's saying. I'm going to continue walking. And so as I'm walking, I hear him talking to someone else, a woman. Now, I assume it was the woman who yelled at me earlier, but I don't know because I'm not going to dare turn around. And I'm listening to what they're saying. And they assume because I had some black clothing that I was Antifa. So what's ironic is if they voted, they probably voted for the guy that I was coming to tell them about.
Oh,
and I was going to remind them of the election. See, that's the thing is politically, we probably agree, but they would not even hear me out. All right. They didn't listen to what I was trying to say. And so I wound up walking between a quarter and half a mile, all right, down the road, which I'd come. It was a dead end going the other way. Right. And by the end of the road, they had stopped following me. And that was that. Now, one thing I forgot to mention that is, I think, might be an important piece. I don't know. It could be coincidental. But at the very beginning of that block, the first house I had been to,
there was a sign, don't come here if you're part of the PAC.
There was a detached garage from a house. All right. There was a completely detached garage. It had been there had been an intentional arson attack.
Okay.
And so, but they aren't their neighbors per se, but they certainly would have been aware of it. So they could have concluded that there had been an attack on that man's house. And I had been there. And see, that was the other thing. I didn't even think about it at the time, but I had seen the garage when I'd gone to the guy's house. And now his door was a couple of steps up. And because of the coronavirus, what I would do is I'd knock on the door, but then I'd step down. All right. I'd step away from it, but I was also looking up to him. When he answered his door, right, he was sort of looking at me, but he was also looking up and scanning, seeing if there was anybody else.
So what did the PAC say? The PAC group say once you got back, you're like,
Well,
fuck this, I'm done. I'm going to South Korea.
well, okay. So what happened in the end was this organization is doing this type of thing in many different states. And I can only go by what they told me they did. Because of what happened, they warned everybody who was doing what I was doing did. And they also understood when I said, okay, I've worked for you for 3 days. I want you to take me to the airport. I'm done. And they said,
I quit.
yeah, that sounds reasonable. There was no arguments.
Oh, wow.
All right. They were empathetic. They were very sorry that this had happened to me. And I know at least that they warned the people who I was working with. But like I said, this was over many different states.
Right.
I would have to think that they warned everybody, because of course you would not want it anywhere in the news that, ooh, somebody for a PAC died. Well, good God, what happened? And why would you volunteer for that PAC, and so on and so on.
Would they care? Would that, I've never seen. Does this ever happen that people that work for these PACs, I remember super PACs were a big thing a couple of years ago, but I mean, they haven't been in the news lately, not this election cycle.
Well, so one of the things that's been going on is, frankly speaking, a gross overreaction to the coronavirus in some aspects, not all, okay? I want to be clear, certainly not all. But in terms of transmission from one person to another, the likelihood, the wearing of masks, some of it is really overstated. Well, anyway, basically, the Democrats are not even campaigning, except for on television. They're not going door to door or anywhere else. And
it's all social media.
Yeah, but you're forgetting which demographic votes the highest as a percentage and actually has the most people to do it. 16 above. 16 above. Who is the least likely to use Facebook, Twitter, YouTube?
Right.
16 above.
So then after your experience of almost getting shot and threatened, did you cry or panic afterwards? Which one was it?
Well, no, I didn't. I never panicked. I was very concerned, especially for my son.
You said wait until afterwards. I mean,
well, right. Well. So I have an 11-year-old son.
Mm-hmm. Who's not in the United States.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean I'm not responsible for him.
Right. So that's who you're thinking of.
Right. Me dying, me getting I wasn't a threat. Okay. I was in no way a threat. And so my son losing his father to something like this, the state of affairs in the United States as it now stands, I cried for a little bit, but then I just got really enraged. Now, like I said, certainly it was the Republicans and the Democrats and the nonsense that's been going on for a long time. But in this particular year, with the rioting going on since what happened to George Floyd at the end of May, and the Democrats specifically not calling out the violence, has led to this point. If they had called out any of it, all right, they've had 35 deaths to call it out before they finally said something. And what was tragic was Nancy Pelosi basically admitted, well, it's showing up in the polls now, so we're going to talk about it. She said that to a journalist on television.
Sounds like the politics is getting crazy, a lot more crazy over there. All right, well, we have gone through quite a bit today. It's been great talking about a lot of history stuff. You're not just of your traveling throughout the world, but also never knew about Harbin and that Unit 731. I'll look it up. But also, yeah, your plans to move to Fiji and piloting courses and everything, and now you're fleeing the United States of America.
Mm-hmm.
We will see. We'll have to check in again and see how things sort of turn out after the election. I appreciate you coming in and talking to us today, talking to me today, and letting people know sort of both the pros and the cons of what the United States is and what it has
Yeah.
been throughout history and what it is like in the world. So, okay, we will leave it there. Thank you very much. We'll talk again. If people want to get in touch with you, can they, or you have no social media to be published, do you?
Oh, well, you see, the problem is that Facebook, I'm basically getting off of.
Right.
Twitter, I'm on. Let's see, is there anything that stopped me from getting a job?
This interview?
No. Well, well, okay, Goin is not a very common name, albeit, but so at Arapets, I
All
guess,
right.
is on Twitter, and it's
Oh.
exactly how it sounds: AIRAPETS.
All right.
Arapets
Arapets. Okay, I'll
on
put a
Twitter.
link in case people want to troll you afterwards and, I don't know,
Go
threaten you
for it.
some more.
Bring it.
There you go. All right. Thank you very much, Denny. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you,
We'll talk
Steve.
again.
Likewise.
Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye.